You're listening to No Podcast for Old Men.
Welcome to No Podcast for Old Men, the only podcast in the known multiverse wherein three university professors provide philosophical analysis of each and every Coen brothers film in the Coen canon. And today is episode 7. And so that means today we are going to drill down into the 7th film of the Coen brothers. And that is, of course, the classic comedy, The Big Lebowski. My name is Robert Jones. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Peter S. Fosl and Troy Jollymore. Fellas, how you doing? Check in. What's happening?
Petey's doing great, and he can tell me how I'm doing.
That's like you ever hear that old behaviorist joke? You're fine, how am I?
Oh, okay.
We meet on the street, yeah. Troy, you're looking good, Troy.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, yeah, The Big Lebowski, guys. Jeez. This is a big one, isn't it?
I've heard of this one.
I should mention to our audience that Professor Peter S. Fosl has written what I would say is, I'm going to put it out there and say it's the most detailed dive into the Big Lebowski. There's so much detail, and plus there's also philosophical analysis. And Professor Fosl, what is the name of that piece? And we'll put a link to it in the show notes, but what's the name of your article that is the...
Yeah, it's in the Palgrave Handbook of Philosophy and Popular Culture, if I got that right. But the title is The Big Lebowski, Nihilism, Masculinity, and Abiding Virtue. I want to mention, though, too, that, I edited a book on The Big Lebowski, and Robert and Troy have perhaps, maybe, the best article in that book. That's how we got to know one another, because, you just communicate when you're working with editors and authors and all that. And I invited them to come out to Louisville, where I live, for the Lebowski Fest, which was started in Louisville. And they did. When does that happen? And we had just an epic time. I mean, it's just indescribably good weekend together, even with a little tornado thrown in. I hadn't thought about that, like a little serious man, actually.
Oh, yeah, I think the roof blew off the hotel. We had to find another place to stay.
The roof blew off the hotel, literally.
We didn't blow it off, but
We
it
didn't
did
blow it
happen,
off,
and
no.
we were in the vicinity. So,
But Peter Fosl, now that book, can we I was going to mention that as well. You are the editor of...
The Big Lebowski in Philosophy, yes. It's on Wiley.
The year is 2012. So in 2012, yes, you are the editor of that philosophical masterpiece. And yes, Troy and I had a piece. There are so many great essays. I don't even think you can say which one is best. But Troy and I had an essay in that book, and that started our years-long love affair, the three of us. And we went down to the Lebowski Fest.
the menage a Coen, as we like to call it.
What do we call it?
The menage a Coen.
The menage a
Menage a
Coen. I think Troy, I don't know if Troy's the dude. Maybe I'm Donnie, Peter. You might be a little Walter. I don't know.
I don't see a lot of Walter and Peter, I gotta say.
Well, he does have a lot of guns, so that...
Oh, okay, sure.
Anyway.
We kind of have a little bit of each of them, I think.
I think so.
I'll own that. I like Walter. He's all right.
So, well, what do we say we jump in and do do what we do, what we're supposed to do here.
Yeah, and every time I watch it, I've probably watched it, over 100 times.
Only 100 times. What? You're light.
Maybe
You're
more, maybe
Lebowski
more.
lightweight. You haven't cracked the 500 mark yet.
Maybe. And that essay you're talking about in the Palgrave book, that was written during the pandemic, when I could not have done it any other time. It's like when you're stuck, what else are you going to do? I went like frame by frame by frame, and I still keep noticing things, but because it's so impossibly rich with detail. And Yeah, so I did a very slow, read through it. Anyway.
And you know what? It's still this morning. Just for shits and giggles, I just turned on the film while I was doing some other stuff, and I was laughing my ass off. It's still funny.
It's still funny.
At bottom, it's a hilarious film.
Yeah, absolutely.
And my son, who lives in Chicago, he went to one of these late night showings of The Big Lebowski at this local art house. He had never seen it. It was his maiden voyage, and he said that it was hilarious, but it was hard to hear the dialogue because everyone was sort of laughing in anticipation of the next lines. And so it's good to know that there are a bunch of little Lebowskis out there, little dudes out there who are carrying on the tradition.
I take comfort in that, but it's also true. Like it's all over the world. I mean, Lebowski Fest I think they've waned a bit now, but they're all over the world. And in fact, I usually don't pick up the phone when it was on the 10th anniversary of the movie, but because if I don't know the caller, but it said it was from Denmark, and so that's not unusual. So I decided to pick it up. And sure enough, it was a reporter for this national newspaper that I'm embarrassed I can't remember the name of there, and they were doing a story, and I said, "Do people watch this in Denmark?" He's like, "Let me tell you something. In Copenhagen, there's a bar, a Lebowski bar, and every week they screen it, and it's a ticketed event, and it sells out every freaking week. And they play trivia and they drink White Russians and blah blah blah. But yeah, in Edinburgh there was a Lebowski bar. In Glasgow, I know there was one. Really did go all over the place. It became at a certain point I think it was the second most popular sort of midnight cult movie after Rocky Horror Picture Show. But
wow.
Yeah, but it didn't. Of course, well, we don't get it. We'll talk about it later. It didn't land that way, but it grew into that, and we might talk about that. It's a sociological thing, but yeah, I think that's really interesting about the film.
Well, what do you say we jump in and do a little analysis? Because that's what they pay us for to do on this podcast. That's what we're here for.
Those huge checks we keep raking in.
Yeah, right.
Well, usually what we do is at this point in our podcast, we do a kind of brief opening statement on what we think the film is about. We kind of used to call it our lightning round. I don't know what it's called anymore, but we just go around and give some general impressions. And unless I'm mistaken, we usually start with Professor Peter S. Fosl. Well, Peter, the film, The Big Lebowski, what's it about, Peter?
And it's about a lot of things. I think it's about friendship. I think it's about crossing political boundaries. I think it's about the way we inhabit time and history, and the way we repeat things over and over and create meaning in our lives. I think it's about other films. I think it's about noir films. It's about American cinema. I think it's a kind of anti-hero film where cowboys and millionaires and detectives are all sort of, I don't want to say subverted, but they're taken off their pedestals, certainly. And so what figured as the heroes in much of American cinema are now called into question. And there's this, and the new question is, well, what's going to replace them? What's the new person that's coming along? And so, yeah, I think those are, and I meant about masculinity too. I think it challenges a lot of the ideas of what makes a man, right? I mean, the movie opens with a discussion of that, and it's brought up several times within the film. So the question of masculinity and what's a man in this moment of time, right? How do you fit in as a man anymore? Especially when those old masculinities, not just in cinema but in culture, are withering, let's just say, or are shaky.
Nice.
Excellent.
Good stuff.
Great observations, as usual, Peter Fosl. Troy Jollimore, let's go over to you. What do you think, The Big Lebowski, what's it about, Troy? What's it all about, Troy?
Robert? What is it not about? It's a film about Los Angeles, and therefore a film about California, therefore a film about America, but the many different types of people who live in America and in LA specifically, the ways they speak, the ways they dress, how they interact with each other, how they try to talk to each other, often inarticulately, and fail to hear each other. All these different people, like each of them is like a character from their own movie genre coming together in a city that's dedicated to making movies. It's a film about the 60s and the various legacies of the 60s, cultural, political, intellectual, spiritual, sartorial. It's a film about idealism and what might survive of idealism in a very non-idealistic time. It's a film about money and power and the ability of the people with money and power to control the narrative, to have their own stories accepted, whether they be true or false. Boy, that sure sounds timely. It's a film about the power of friendship, as Peter mentioned. It's a buddy movie about two people who are so different that it's kind of amazing they can even tolerate each other. Their deep bond of affection and their amazing ability to see the real human beings underneath the surfaces. It's a film about mortality, the brief lives of human beings. The wind passeth over it, and it is gone. And finally, I'd say, and this is a little overlap here with something Peter said, it's a film structured by 3 questions that are posed to the dude early on. There's the plot question, where's the money, Lebowski? That's the detective mystery question. And then there's 2 other questions. Are you a Lebowski achiever? And what makes a man, Mr. Lebowski? And these are questions about the issues that Socrates said were most important to us, self-knowledge and how we ought to live.
Damn, that was good.
That was good. That was very good. As usual, you two guys. Well, I'm going to,
Robert, yeah, what do you think?
No, there's a lot of overlap. So I'll just run through mine because you guys hit most of the biggies. But as you both pointed out, it is a film about friendship. One of Troy's areas of expertise. Yeah, it's a buddy movie, buddy film. It's also a Western. It is a subversion of the film noir genre. I like to call it it's not a hard-boiled detective film. It's a soft-boiled detective film, if that's a genre, maybe it is. It's a critique of capitalism. It's a film that focuses on class distinctions. It's definitely an anti-war film, and it's a film about the culture wars, which is still relevant. It's a film about nihilism or avoiding nihilism. It's a film, as many Coen brothers films are, about appearance versus reality. It's a film, and this is a theme that Troy likes to push on. It's a film about transgressing lines, or transgressing boundaries and borders, and lines in the sand and lines on the lane and invasions of homes. So that's a theme there. And of course, as you both mentioned, it's a film about masculinity. But I think there's also a little bit of a critique of marriage in the film. Marriage it's not held up as a kind of vaunted institution. But anyway, those are my thoughts. And yeah, there you go. That's what it's about.
And it's about bowling. Did any of us say that it's about bowling?
Bowling?
It's about bowling. Yeah, we'd have to figure it out.
Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar.
Glad you brought in nihilism.
Yeah.
I immediately thought, you didn't mention the nihilism. Yeah.
All right. Well, why don't we go to our summary expert? I think we need I'm going to start insert music, like a little drum roll. Summary expert. Troy Jollimore, give us a little summary of The Big Lebowski.
Let me tell you, summarizing The Big Lebowski, I think in my long and illustrious career of summarizing films, this may have been the greatest challenge. So you cannot summarize this film, but let me give it a whirl. And of course, probably goes without saying, but spoiler alert, if you haven't seen this film, who are the people who haven't seen The Big Lebowski? If you haven't seen this film, or even if it's been a long time, go watch it, refresh your memory first. Don't have any elements of the plot given away. It's such a pleasure to go in not knowing. All right, The Big Lebowski plot. The place, Los Angeles. The time, let's say the early 90s, around the time of the first Gulf War, following Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. So there's this guy, the dude, played by Jeff Bridges, an aging hippie who takes a relaxed attitude toward life, has no job or visible means of support, whose main activity is bowling in a league on a team with his 2 friends, the short-fused, high-strung, belligerent Vietnam vet Walter Sobchak, that's John Goodman, and Donnie Karabatsos, the meek third wheel who happens to be an excellent bowler, played by Steve Buscemi. The dude's real name, incidentally, is Jeffrey Lebowski. This matters because as the film opens, his cozy little bungalow is invaded by a couple of thugs who ask him, "Where's the money, Lebowski?" even though the dude has no money, and makes some remarks about his wife, even though the dude has no wife. It transpires that they've mistaken him for a different Jeffrey Lebowski, one who has a lot of money, and a hot young trophy wife, Bunny, who is also a lot. Before leaving, the thugs urinate on the dude, or micturate, we should perhaps say, on the dude's rug, a prized possession which, as Walter reminds him, really tied the room together. Now, the dude, being the dude, is inclined to just let the matter go. But Walter convinces him that he's been the victim of an injustice and he should go to the wealthy Lebowski and demand compensation. The dude is not given a rug by the wealthy Lebowski, but he takes one anyway. On his way out, he meets both Bunny Lebowski and her German friend, Uli Kunkel, who we learn is a nihilist. He remains at some distance from Uli, who's down in the pool, but gets close enough to Bunny, almost to blow on her toes, which she has just painted. Not long after, he's contacted by Brandt, wealthy Lebowski's obsequious manservant. Incredible performance by Philip Seymour Hoffman. Love it. The dude learns that Bunny Lebowski has been kidnapped, which is a bummer, man, and her husband wants him to deliver the ransom money, a task for which he will be amply compensated. The dude agrees, but only if it doesn't interfere with their bowling league schedule. He's got his priorities. Although the kidnappers insisted that he go alone and that there be no funny stuff, Walter insists on accompanying him, and it turns out there's all sorts of funny stuff. Walter has a plan. He swaps out the ransom money bag with a decoy bag containing his dirty underwear so that they can keep the ransom, and find out Bunny's location by grabbing one of the kidnappers and beating it out of him. As was frequently the case in Walter's primary point of conversational reference, Vietnam, things don't go quite as planned. The dude's car gets pretty badly shot up by Walter's own gun, and they find out nothing about where Bunny is. The good news, thanks to Walter's scheming, the ransom bag is still in the back of the dude's car. 1 million bones or clams or whatever you call them. The bad news, almost as soon as they get back from this escapade, the car is stolen with the money in it. The other bad news, since they failed to make the drop-off, Bunny Lebowski's life, which was in their hands, is presumably in grave danger. You can imagine where it goes from here. Or maybe you can't. The story is ludicrous. This is a complicated case, lots of ins, lots of outs, lots of what-haves-yous. And I'm not going to try to summarize it all here. Let's say that they do track down the car, they find the kid they think stole it, but they find out nothing from him about where the money might be. Meanwhile, the dude is being chased by a variety of parties, wealthy Lebowski and Brandt, who are furious that he failed to deliver the money, especially after receiving a package that appears to contain one of Bunny's toes, perhaps the very toe the dude almost blew on. Also, the smut peddler, Jackie Treehorn, to whom Bunny Lebowski owns money. Also, a shadowy figure, mysterious guy driving a Volkswagen Beetle. Not to mention a group of nihilists led by the aforementioned Uli Kunkel. Also, Maud Lebowski, wealthy Lebowski's daughter, a painter and conceptual artist who clearly has some agenda of her own, who takes back the dude's new rug, borrows his robe, and borrows his Johnson, although with permission, in this case, for a night of natural zesty enterprise, also known as coitus. Post-coitus, the dude learns from her that wealthy Lebowski, in fact, only appears to be wealthy. It's all a front. He has no money, which leads him to a sudden insight. He realizes that wealthy Lebowski grew tired of his wife and never wanted Bunny to be rescued, and hence sent the dude to the drop-off, bearing not a bag of cash, but an empty bag, a ringer. The plan was to take the $1 million from a charity account and keep it for himself, claiming that he used it for the ransom. The dude and Walter rush to the Lebowski mansion, where, as it happens, they find Bunny there. She was never kidnapped at all, and she's returned on her own. They confront the old man with the truth, to which he more or less shrugs and says, "So what? You have your story, I have mine." Not that far off from something the dude himself told a rival bowler sometime earlier. Well, that's just like your opinion, man. So the mystery is solved, and it doesn't really seem to matter. As they leave the bowling alley, they are confronted by Uli and his gang of nihilists. During the confrontation, Donnie suffers a fatal heart attack. The dude and Walter place Donnie's ashes in a modestly priced receptacle and scatter them near the ocean, then return to the lanes to knock down a few pins. The dude utters his famous final line, "The dude abides." And as the film ends, we learn that Maud is pregnant. A little Lebowski is on the way. That's the movie in a nutshell.
Wow.
With lots that I could not mention because, man, this movie has a lot going on.
Now, Troy, you took a movie that is, the plot is convoluted and obscure, and you clarified it for us, and yet it still is, even though I've seen it 100 times, I'm still scratching my head. not quite clear on what the Coen brothers were thinking. And of course, I was thinking about The Big Sleep and how I often watch that film and say, what the hell were they thinking? So, anyway, great summary though.
Great
Let's
summary.
acknowledge that summary. Peter,
Well
I'm
done.
sorry. Go ahead.
Well done.
Thank you.
Yeah, I did want to say, if pick up on what you said there, Robert. Here's my sort of theory on the way that it drifts along or winds around. Is The Big Sleep does that too. This film is, of course, an homage to The Big Sleep, and that's a really convoluted plot as well. But there also might be like a symbolism of the way that the dude kind of drifts through life, and winds around without a clear direction. And I think that's a bigger film about the state of the country and the culture of the time. But we'll get into that later. But anyway, those are two of my quick thoughts about that.
Oh, Peter Fosl, that's a good segue. Perfect segue for us to head into our next segment of the podcast, which is our political, social, cultural themes of the Coen brothers film. And I think in this one, as we mentioned in our opening lightning round, there's a lot to talk about. So, Peter, why don't you start us off on that journey?
Yeah, I mean, there's obvious things. So it's set, during the first Gulf War, and so there's this background of war. Walter's a Vietnam veteran, and the dude was a anti-war protester. So there's the background of the Vietnam War. I think there's even like a small allusion to World War II in the sense that, I once was thinking like, well, where's race in this film? And I think you get it with Asians and Germans, which I guess Germans aren't a race, but it's very curious how both of those ethnicities, I mean, Asia and Germany, and you're thinking, well, maybe World War II is a little bit behind that. But there's this background of violence and violent conflict that I think is interesting. Also, so it comes out in 98. It's set in 91, but comes out in 98. And I should say, the film does announce this question at the beginning. I mean, it comes off as a question, to me anyway, how the dude fits right in with his place and time. How does he fit in? What does it mean to fit in? And so, the place and time is 1991, and under the first Bush administration. That's on the heels of the Reagan era, of course. And so there are these figures that are these throwbacks, kind of, right? I mean, they're inhabiting the forms of the Vietnam era, Walter and the dude. And I think it does raise the question, and this might be true of 1998 too, which is towards the end of the Clinton era, and about where we stand. What we have these old kinds of things. I've noticed. What's her name? She's a film critic of the Los Angeles Times. Amy Nicholson, I think. Yeah. Anyway, she made this observation, and I thought was kind of right, is that the culture was kind of in a loose place. Identities were slipping, and a kind of vision of the future wasn't quite clear yet. So I think there's this question about what do we do about these old tropes? How do we continue to inhabit them? And one of the ways, well, I'll get into more of the philosophical, but there's a way that we keep repeating these. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? I think it raises. So I think there's these questions about war. There's questions about a society that's sort of awash, drifting along with the tumbleweeds, and again, there's the themes of gender that I already mentioned a bit. Although I will say, just as a teaser for the future, we talk more about that. I think you can make a case that Bunny is the real Big Lebowski. I think if you compare how the women are in the film, they're certainly backgrounded, and that's often a criticism of the film. But I think there's a way that, and this happens a lot in Coen Brothers films, that women become the heroes, and I think Bunny deserves.
Whoa, Bunny is the Big Lebowski.
I think you can make an argument.
Wow, you just dropped it. You just dropped that one on us.
That's a teaser.
That's what the kids call a hot take.
It's a hot.
So anyway, we'll get to that later. Yeah,
Nice.
That's my quick summary.
That's great. Hey, Troy, you want to jump in with some of the political, social, cultural themes of The Big Lebowski?
Yeah, I mean, the war background is a big one. And of course, they put it out there at the very beginning and then don't advert to it very explicitly very often. And yet it's always kind of there and it's coming up in, the things that people say. I mean, one of the things this movie does, of course, is it has its characters repeat things other people have said or things that they've heard in the news and so on and recycle them for their own purposes. So this whole Bush rhetoric of drawing a line in the sand, this aggression will not stand and so on, gets picked up by Walter when he's trying to convince the dude to go and pursue his own little brand of justice because he's been aggressed upon, rather as Kuwait has been. Walter doesn't make it that explicit, or he doesn't say that, but it's there. The comparison's kind of there. And so
Oh, definitely.
it's the way that these big world events get into our consciousnesses and then play out in people's lives in much smaller affairs and control our thinking in a way. So there's all that war stuff, which is very important there's political stuff connected with that. I mean, Peter, I think you said, these guys are kind of recognizable in terms of where they are in the political landscape, at least in a lot of ways, though they sometimes go against the positions they seem to occupy. But the dude is clearly, again, a kind of aging hippie on the left somewhere, sort of a live and let live kind of guy. Walter is on the sort of violent individual rights, strident, righteous right. The Big Lebowski, well, again, Peter thinks Bunny's the Big Lebowski, so I'll say wealthy Lebowski, the rich guy. Of course, he's not even really rich, so I don't know what you call this guy, the big faker. Anyway, he's on the right too, but he's a very different right than Walter. You don't get the feeling he cares much about individual rights of the sort that Walter does, maybe. He's into property rights, especially for the wealthy. So you've got this sort of constellation of political figures representing different ideas and reactions to different ideas, all interacting in various ways and all connected in various ways. I mean, dude and Walter are good friends. The dude shares a name with this apparently wealthy guy. The dude also in some ways turns out to be like the wealthy guy in certain respects, very different in important others. And Walter too, is like the wealthy faker Lebowski in that both of them use bags of fake money, ringers or meta ringers for ringers, to try to cheat somebody. Both of them seem sort of unconcerned with the possible fallout in terms of damage to innocent people, what it might do to Bunny, and so on. There's these interesting connections between these people that on the surface look very different. And I do think, of course, as Robert said earlier, that one of the most interesting connections here is the friendship between the dude and Walter, because both of you actually alluded to this in your comments, that they seem so different and they're such good friends. Can we really be good friends with people whose views on the world are so different from us and who are in many ways, really hard to get along with in daily life? Because Walter certainly isn't easy. The question of can we and the question of should we, I think, is also lurking there. What's the line that a person crosses when you should stop being their friend? So I'll mention two more sort of quick things. The film, again, is set in L.A. We get kind of a tour of L.A. as the dude goes around meeting different people, kind of pursuing, trying to get the money back, trying to answer the question, and so on. But it's a quite different L.A. than we often see in the films. And it's sort of more of an underworld in a way. It's kind of seedier in a lot of ways. It's marginal. The dude lives in a marginal L.A. You don't see the L.A. of the bowling alleys very often in film, but here it is. And then these other people, like, for instance, maybe my favorite example, that L.A. again is a movie city. It's the movie industry. The only movie industry, though, that we really make contact with here is the porn industry, right? We get Jackie Treehorn. That's sort of the movie industry. It's these seedy videos again, and we see a little of one. And that's the extent to which this movie set in L.A. gets into the Hollywood film industry. Well, it's not Hollywood at all. It's something quite different. And yet it's a real industry, and people work in it, and it's very important. In fact, there's a lot of money in it. And then the last thing I'll mention, and this came up earlier a little bit, you mentioned The Big Sleep, clearly Chandler's novel here and the movie made from it being kind of models for this. And this noir framework, I think, again, that relates to this thing about the underworld LA. And a noir story is very often a story of a person taking a journey into the underworld, and maybe sort of an innocent or somewhat clean person being sullied or corrupted by that journey, or seeing if they can remain unsullied and uncorrupted, which in noir, at least, they rarely do. So, and this gets into some of the philosophical themes I'm sure we'll bring up later, that noir is very much about the darkness that lurks beneath the surface, which it's the detective's task to penetrate and reveal and uncover. And so it becomes this kind of metaphysical quest. And I think that the dude is certainly on a version of that metaphysical quest. So that's all I'll say about this for the moment.
I do, but just pick up. I'm playing another seed from we get the philosophical theme, because in my own work I address that bit about overcoming the. There's these borders that are crossed, but one of them could be that political divisions, and I do think it's a lesson for our time. You can really see, Walter being a kind of MAGA person, maybe the dude being much more of a progressive, and the fact that they get along is just, it kind of cries out for analysis and the question, what makes that possible? What virtues do they have that makes that possible? And, as a kind of socialist, anarchist who lives in Kentucky, a couple blocks away from Mitch McConnell, I'm familiar with it in a very practical way, but trying to have friendships and teach students and, pursue a life among people whose political views are very different from my own.
I got to tell you on that theme, like so many people, the first time I saw The Big Lebowski, I enjoyed it mildly, but was kind of let down, didn't really get it. When I watch that movie now, A, it's so much funnier, but B, that final scene after they scatter Donnie's ashes and the dude blows up at Walter and then they hug each other,
The hug,
just
it's
moves
so
me.
great.
Oh my God,
Yeah.
that is one of the most moving things that
really
I can
is.
think of. It's gorgeous.
It
And
is.
I wonder, when I first saw it, I thought, what is the end is so crazy, right? Donnie dies. It makes no sense. It doesn't work at all. And now I just think it's glorious. It's so profound and moving.
It's glorious, yeah.
It transcends friendship. It's a familial or tribal kind of connection in the sense like no matter what Walter does, no matter what boundaries he transgresses in the mind of the dude, in the end, family is family. It's that kind of relationship where they're
Well, I
not
mean,
gonna
or
sacrifice.
it's one of the great scenes that way too. But I mean, I think the hug is the best. But after the debacle at Little Larry's, the dude's really angry, and he runs off to his house. Everything, he nails the dumb board into the phone. And, Walter calls, and he says, "Leave me the fuck alone." Then he says, "Yeah, I'll be at practice." Of course, I'm still coming to practice.
It is a
I'm mad at
beautiful
you as
scene.
shit, but
It's just so matter of fact, yeah, of course, yeah. This doesn't affect that. I love that moment.
Let me jump in with a few of my political, social, cultural themes. I think it's a critique of capitalism in the following way, and that is there's this myth that wealthy capitalists promote, and this goes way back to the Chicago School and Reagan, but the idea that the wealthy are generating wealth, and there's this trickle down, and it's the movement of the wealth is from the top down. But really, what happens in the real world is that the wealthy extract wealth from the poor and the middle class, creating inequality and poverty. And so the Big Lebowski, Jeffrey Lebowski, he promotes this myth of himself as being industrious and, not living on the dole like the dude. But in actuality, he is extracting wealth from Maud's charity, right? So I think the idea that capitalists create wealth, this movie pulls the veil away and says, no, it's actually it's the opposite. That's really what's going on. So I think there's that aspect, that critique of capitalism, the Coens in the past and in other films, they do critique capitalism. And the second theme I was thinking about that is social, which is this kind of class distinction. And Troy, you alluded to this. There's a sense in which Walter and the Big Lebowski share certain political beliefs, but class-wise, there's a serious class distinction, right? And I think it's not a coincidence that Walter and the dude and Donnie, they play the working man's game. They play the working class game. They bowl, right? But like bocce, all these things are not. These are peasant class. So there's class distinction in the film, and even though there might be political alignment between someone like Walter and the Big Lebowski, there certainly is a vast chasm between them class-wise.
Can I just quick jump in, Robert,
sure,
to
please, yeah.
sort of compliment what you say there? I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, there with capital too. I mean, so they got the Big Lebowski, he's big capital, but Walter's, a petite bourgeoisie guy. He's got his own business. He's a kind of capitalist himself, and almost none of them work. If you notice, there are very few of them. It's DeFino works and Walter works. Is anyone else work in that movie? There's I guess Brandt works.
The thugs work, but the thugs who come in, they do a kind of work. But you're right. There's very few.
There's
The
a lot
drivers
not
of the
working.
cars, these are the working people
Yeah,
that
the
we
drivers.
generally see.
Yeah.
But going back to the anti-war theme, I think that the dude is obviously at odds with the establishment, which I should mention that so is McCord from Branded. He is like the dude. They are both it's kind of Western heroes. The dude and branded. His name was Jason McCord. That was, I think it was Chuck Connors. Anyway, they're both kind of like the Western anti-establishment. And of course, we hear from the dude when he's Maud, her entreaty is to tell me about yourself. And he mentions that he was one of the original writers of the Port Huron Statement, which for you historians, you know that I didn't know this until I looked it up. But that was written in 1962 and, was a kind of a manifesto of a leftist student organization. It was written in Michigan, at Port Huron. And then also he says he was a member of the Seattle Seven, which was a famous kind of anti-war, kind of leftist radical group in the early 70s. And of course, Jeff Dowd is who the dude is sort of loosely based on. He was a member of the Seattle Seven. So we do have the anti-war aspect. Now, it's not clear to me if the Coens are taking the anti-war aspect seriously. They do this oftentimes. They raise these issues and then they parody them. So we're never quite sure. Like, I guess it's anti-war, but maybe they're critiquing anti-war, but they're also valorizing it. Anyway, so I think the culture wars, which in my lifetime, though, the culture wars, I have distant memories of like Newt Gingrich and all that going back to the Reagan era, but it's alive and well, right? Now it's like woke culture. So anyway, there's a little culture war issue in there. And then last two things I'll say is, of course, as you brought up, the issue of masculinity and what it is to be a man. And I think that, again, the Coens are sort of subverting the genre here. It's instead of having the hard-boiled detective and the tough guy and the Bogart beating people up and and Peter Fosl, you're an expert at this. You wrote your essay, but the subversion and also parodying and also in some ways valorizing what the Coens are all over the map when it comes to with their view of masculinity. So they sort of let us make decisions about that. And the last thing I wanted to bring up is a kind of critique of marriage, right? As sort of like marriage is not really a workable institution. So the dude, he mentions when they break into his apartment, he says, obviously, I'm not married when he's talking about, where's your wife? Your wife is spending money. And then we have, the Big Lebowski and Bunny, their marriage is a sham. We have Walter and Cynthia, which, Walter becomes like a cuck. He's kind of like he's like watching the dog. And so that marriage is a sham. And then lastly, the dude in Maud. It's not there's no intent for love. I mean, she says, love me, Jeffrey, but it's not about love, right? She's trying to reproduce. There's no talk of we'll raise the kid together, we'll get married. So, but when we see in the film this marriage as an institution, it's not, the Coens doesn't come off as a positive thing. Anyway.
It's very interesting. If I can, jump in on that just for a second, because Robert, you mentioned earlier about the family bond between Walter and the dude. And I think that's exactly right. And the Coens are so often interested in family, and then we've seen it in Raising Arizona, certainly, more than any other film up to this point, but also in Fargo. And, we see some dysfunctional families there too. The one family that really works in this film is not a literal family at all, but clearly the trio of the three main male characters, the bowling league team, is a kind of family. And
maybe you could say it argues that Philly is more important than Storga family.
I think there's something to that, but I really think that this triad of people are sort of playing roles of a traditional family in the sense that Walter's clearly the father. He's the strong father figure giving orders, laying down the law, the Abrahamic sort of figure. The dude is the mother, right? Gentle, kind, nice, sweet. Donnie's clearly the kid, right? Donnie, what can you even say about Donnie? What do you know about him? At the end, when Walter summarizes his life, he says he spent his life playing. He bowled and he surfed. Like, that's who Donnie was. Donnie asked questions like, what's a pederast? And or when they're talking about the dudes Johnson and the threats to it, Donnie says, "What do you need that for, dude?" He doesn't know anything about sex. He asks all these, and Walter tries to change the subject. Right? He's always telling Donnie to shut up because he doesn't want to answer these questions. And Walter literally says to him, of course, one of the first things he says to Donnie is, "You're like a child who has wandered into a movie in the middle." Right? Like Donnie is the child of this, and so part of the tragedy of this film is that this is a couple who loses their child. I think. And Donnie and Walter says when they're eulogizing him again before scattering the ashes, he compares him to the Vietnam people who died there, and says that, like so many there, Lord, you took him before his time. So I just think that it's set up to be this family. And it's sad in the sense that, again, the child dies, but it is really the one family in the film that works. Whereas every other family that we see, or attempted a family, is just coming apart. Yeah, people are leaving. DeFino seems to make a lot of his living on what he calls wandering daughter jobs, right? Tracking down children who have run away from their parents. So families are splitting up everywhere. But these three
Keep
guys
them
have
down on
found
the
a way to
farm
make
once they've seen Carl
once they've seen
Hungus.
Carl Hungus. That's right. Yeah. So.
You know what I always thought was not strange, but I guess it does reflect Donnie's naivete when they're at the bowling alley in the beginning, and he says, the guy who, this is really about the Jeffrey Lebowski. And Donnie goes, Lebowski, that's your last name, dude. I always wondered, like, the way he says it, it's almost like it's like an insight he has.
It totally is. No, I love that. And of course, Donnie later, he's such a kid, right? When they're talking about going to get the money from Larry Sellers, he's like, "Oh, can we go to In-N-Out?"
Yeah.
That's his big concern. That's near the In-N-Out. Can we go?
Oh, by the way, but connecting capital to masculinity, I think a really interesting moment, and it's meant. I think it's a kind of counterpoint to the Rich Lebowski's tirade about the revolution being over. So when the dude is coming in, he's looking at all the awards and shit on the wall there with Brandt touring him through it. He gets to a mirror with the Time magazine picture on him, Man of the Year, and it's the dude. The dude is the Man of the Year, not the Big Lebowski. I mean the wealthy Lebowski. Mm-hmm. And just to update that a little bit, remember Donald Trump got really mad when he wasn't the Man of the Year in I think it was like 2017 or something like that. So yeah, Trump doesn't get to be Man of the Year, at least not that year. Rich Lebowski doesn't get to be Man of the Year. The dude is the Man of the Year, and he doesn't really give a shit about it anyway.
That's part of what makes him the Man of the Year. He doesn't care. He doesn't strive for it. Yeah.
He fits
Yeah.
right in.
I think we need to talk more. We will about the dude's masculinity and his amazing self-confidence. I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we use this as a segue into our philosophical themes of the Big Lebowski? And what do you say, Peter? You want to lead us into that domain?
Yeah. Where to begin with this? So we've already touched on one of them. I think it's a question of virtue and what it means to abide. And I'm going to have actually a question here because there's a little detail I can't believe I missed before, and it has to do with the earth, being kind of earthbound. You, in your essay, by the way, on rules, I think you really put your finger on something. In a way, you could look at the nihilists as being like anti-rule, and even though they're not very good at that, and Walter being excessive in his rule rigidity. I use that phrase from your article a lot. He's rule rigid, and maybe it's a kind of Goldilocks thing. The dude has maybe a proper relationship with rules, and I think that's a really interesting question. So he doesn't freak out and pull a gun when somebody, which is disproportionate to the violation, of course, and he's committing all kinds of rule breaking at the moment. And he also doesn't pretend that there are no rules. But I think there's something about it, almost Aristotelian, and there's a kind of golden mean there. I think this virtue of abiding is really interesting, and his sort of life of I think one of the essays in my book calls it contented poverty, which is a philosophical theme, sort of too. But I think if we just talk about the virtue of abiding for a second, so abiding means in a way, first of all, you can abide by the law, right? So you can abide rules and principles and laws, but it's also a way of like persisting, right? And so there's a way that abiding is a way of kind of continuing through, and which the dude does. He abides. He continues through, although there's a sense of his mortality and his finitude at the end. But he's going to repeat himself in the child, which is a way that human beings, which Aristotle understood. Aristotle understood that the natural world has these cycles. There's cycles of the planetary, the celestial spheres, and I mean the celestial things up there, and then there's the seasons. They revolve, they change, but they come back around. Acorns become oaks, which then shed acorns.
It's kind of like a hula hoop, I think.
Yes.
Kind of like a hula hoop.
We're back again at the theme of revolution and of things coming around
Revolution.
again. And yeah, absolutely.
Literal
Cycles.
revolution. And bowling, you do it over and over again. And the film opens showing these people one after another, rolling their balls, which I think is very much like, by the way, Sisyphus and rolling his rock. In fact, Donnie says, I'm really, throwing
Rocks tonight. Yeah.
Yeah,
First thing he
and,
says, right?
Exactly. And so I think there's this way in which, by this kind of, and there's a repetition that persists, and you go through these cycles, and you re-inhabit these forms. So the dude is re-inhabiting every day. This is like a Kierkegaardian thing about repetition. You re-inhabit these forms, but you tweak them. You inhabit them in slightly different ways as you move through time, and I think that's a real theme of the way things go. And in fact, what I noticed, to just not to take too much time, but that I couldn't believe I missed before, I never really analyzed the lyrics, the tumbling tumbleweeds, which the damn thing opens with. I was always reading this just as like a symbol about the West, and it's a Western. It's announcing its place in the West, maybe the American West, but also just Western films, et cetera, Western heroes. But if you look at them, it says, pledging their love to the ground, lonely but free I'll be found, drifting along with the tumbleweeds. I mean, is that kind of abiding, drifting along with the tumbleweeds? Cares of the past are behind. Nowhere to go, but I'll find just where the trail will wind, drifting along with the tumbleweeds. And it's, the last verse is, I know when night has gone that a new world's born, the child at the end, a new world's born at dawn. I'll keep rolling along. Deep in my heart is a song, here on the range I belong, drifting along with the tumbleweeds. I mean, it tells you right.
It's the whole movie right there.
It's the whole freaking movie. And but it's the ground bit, because so pledging their love to the ground, and at the end, like, this can't be. Is this an accident? This is the kind of shit I would notice. But the dude's wearing a bowling shirt that is about a company that sells sod, earth, and we know that the biblical quotations are allude to the earth too. One generation passeth away, and another generation cometh. Right, the little Lebowski's on the way, but the earth abideth forever. Whoa! And that's Ecclesiastes 1:4, by the way.
That's wonderful. Now, of course, can I just mention here that if you look at the Psalms, you find these lines. These are written on the wall of the funeral home that they go to at the end.
That's right.
As for man, his days are as grass. Yeah, as a flower of the field, so he flourishes. For the wind passes over it, and it is gone. So yeah, we have the book ending the film. We have these lyrics at the beginning, and then these words on the wall at the end. Yeah. Oh, and maybe we should, I suppose, since we're on this, the Townes Van Zandt cover of the Rolling Stones song at the end, right? Dead flowers. We're also in the earth and things dying. Yeah.
And of course, Donnie is ashes to ashes.
And Donnie's
dust to
ashes.
dust,
Yep,
right?
for sure. Yeah.
And Peter, can I ask you to expand on something? Because I know this is your area. There are many, but this is the implicit Epicureanism, the kind of valorizing the doing of nothing, or kind of letting the wind blow where it takes you. Can you pick up on that?
Well, not so much that drifting along bit, which I think is interesting, and could be, as Amy Nicholson says, that's a comment on where the culture was at the time, didn't know where it was going. But on the other hand, maybe that's a virtue, not to just move, to be able to move along in that way. But this is in one of the essays in my book. I forget who wrote it, but it's something many have noticed, actually. So the dude is poor but content, and the Epicureans, the ancient Epicureans, contrary to how that word is used today, they advocated kind of simple living. They were against what they call kinetic pleasures, which are like, orgasmic, wow, adrenaline-filled wealth they weren't into. They thought simple living without much material wealth, just eating, very simple foods. Friendship was a very important virtue for Epicureans. That leads to a kind of peacefulness, an autoroxia, tranquility. It's when people pursue these excessive kinetic, luxurious ecstatic pleasures that they actually end up. It's like drinking, and then you have a hangover later. But these simple kind of they're calm and they endure pleasures are characteristic of Epicureans. I mean, some people think that the virtues of the Epicureans are kind of embodied in the dude. Anyway, I think he does get upset though more than the Epicurean sage would.
He's not perfect. There are certainly
not perfect,
moments when he does get very undued, as Walter accuses him at one point. But
He's
yeah,
not.
I mean,
He's not a hero. He's not.
but on the whole, he's so easygoing about things. He doesn't grip things tightly, right? Even the rug, he has to be talked into going after it. Yeah, he's not going to do anything about it. And he complains. So Walter talks him into it, and that's where so many of his troubles come from, because Walter says, Walter's the man of action always. Right? We got to do something about this. We can't let it stand. This aggression will not stand.
That's fucking interesting.
The dude says later on, I could just be sitting here with pee stains on my rug. Like, you had to talk me into going and pursuing this and making all this trouble. And then there's the wonderful moment when he's in the limousine talking to the guy. The driver tells the joke about
Tony.
Tone. That's the guy's name. That's right.
Tone.
Yeah. But you know me, I can't complain.
Dom Herrera.
Dom Herrera. That's right. And the dude says, I'm doing okay. I was a little down. I lost a little money, but you can't get worked up about that stuff. Well, the little money he's talking about is $1 million, but he just lets it go. He's okay. Like.
Here's what the past are behind.
One of the things I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but it seems like the things that the dude does get riled up about are about people, right? Like a lot of people will be really angry about the rug or losing the money, but he gets angry at Walter because he thinks that Bunny's life might be in danger. He gets angry at Defina because he thinks, what kind of person do you think I am? Right? She's my lady friend, right?
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So
his weird concern with the precise terminology from that's right.
But Defina's the only person he's really mean to.
He is a little bit mean to Defina. But I guess what I'm saying is that.
No, but you're right. Yeah, he cares about people.
He cares about people.
Almost always
material.
when he's upset, he's mad at Walter because Walter pulled the pistol on Smokey. He's mad at Walter in general because Walter's mean to people. He's dangerous. He's reckless. There is one weird exception. Of course, I still have never understood, and that's how much the dude hates the Eagles. Like, what is that about?
That's right.
I don't know what that's about. But
that must be an inside joke with that.
I got a theory.
You got a theory. Oh, good. I'm glad you got a theory.
It's California pop rock. I mean, come on.
I know, but the dude should just let it go, right? He's the dude. Like, whatever.
But before you go to the music, Robert, I mean, there is a dark moment with the dude when he's upset. He threatens to castrate little Larry.
Okay, that's true.
That's true.
Child. He does go over the line with Larry Sellers. That is true. Yes.
Yeah, that was wrong. That was really wrong.
In the heat of the moment, again, the dude's not a hero. He's not perfect. But no, I agree with Robert that, in general, that's his real concern is with people.
Troy, do you want to? Can we jump over to your philosophical themes? What do you say, Troy?
I mean, we've already at least mentioned the appearance reality thing, and that's pretty big. That comes up. The thing I love about this theme is it never dies. It philosophically just keeps on giving, and it's always there in some way. It's one of the deepest, most persistent themes of Western philosophy. And in the Coen films, we find it, I think, in every one in some version. And here it is again, but a different version. And in this case, so much of it is about people's presentation and their identity and the question of who they really are. The wealthy Lebowski being maybe the most obvious example of somebody whose appearance and reality are so at odds and who is so concerned with cultivating a fake appearance to precisely as a means of getting power. If you look like you have power, people will treat you as if you do, and then you have power. That's the trick that he is using for his life. But the reality of it is he's sitting there spewing these right-wing epithets about the bums and so on, and he's a bum himself. He talks about how important it is to achieve, and he's never achieved anything. So the whole thing is just a fake, right? It's a false front. And which enrages the dude when he finds out, but it really enrages Walter, right? Walter certainly can't stand this sort of fakery. And one of Walter's It's not so much quite fakery maybe as amateurs, but he loves that as an insult, right? People who pretend to be good at things, but they're not, the amateurs.
Yeah, and then he accuses him of being a fake,
Well, of course,
disabled
Walter
person.
goes too far, right? You're not even really handicapped. You don't even need the chair. And so there's that.
Goldbricker. Is that what he says? He calls
But
him
yeah, Goldbricker, that's right. He's Goldbricker ass, doesn't
Goldbricker.
he? Yes, that's right. Yeah. So that whole sequence is great. Walter, as usual, takes the valid insight and carries it too far into the realm of the false conclusion. But this appearance reality thing, like this movie, it's so interesting to me that this came out right after Fargo. And of course, it was written before Fargo, and they would have filmed it first, but John Goodman wasn't available, so it ended up being done after. These two films are so different in such interesting ways and so similar in such interesting ways. But one of the contrasts that really strikes me is that in Fargo, it's set in the Midwest, there's almost nobody in that film who thinks a lot about their presentation and how people see them, right? I think the only ones who really do it overtly are Jerry, who's trying to look like something he's not. And in some ways, Wade, but Wade is what he looks like. So, it might be important that looks like a businessman, but he is a businessman. But in The Big Lebowski, almost everybody to some degree seems to have an image that they've cultivated and that they're trying to impress people with. And I think an interesting question is, does the dude, or is the dude just who he is? That's naturally who he is. And I'm tempted to think that. But you might think that somebody with that kind of strong image has to have put some thought into it. And he does tutor people occasionally on what they call him, right? And stuff like that. I'm not Jeffrey Lebowski. I'm the dude or El Duderino or whatever. So he's put a little thought into it. But for the most part, it seems to me that the dude is really just happy to be who he is. Whereas almost everybody else, in one way or another, I think, has
Yeah,
cultivated
you do
a
wonder
kind
if
of
Maud is
image.
really all that much of an artist.
Nobody
to
can be
commend her
quite
art.
like that, right? That Maud's, and I like Maud. I think Maud is one of the more positive, admirable characters in a lot of ways, but clearly to some degree, that accent's a put on and the hair.
That's
and
Katharine
thing.
Hepburn, yeah.
She's thought a lot about how she looks and how she comes across, right?
Yeah, how
I
does
think-
she have a mid-Atlantic accent when
Yeah,
she
where is that coming
from
from?
California?
Come on. So there's a little pretension there too. I still like Maud, but there's a little pretension there too, I think. So.
I think she's envious of Bunny too, by the way,
Oh yeah, the Maud Bunny thing, because that's an interesting dynamic we should probably talk about.
because she says she has sex without joy. Her screen name is Bunny LaJoya, and she looks pretty joyful to me. I'll tell you what. But
Yeah.
anyway, we'll get back to that.
Yeah, no, but I think you're right about that. Yeah, the identity thing, of course, Donnie again being the child who doesn't even really have an identity yet, and so he's always wearing the bowling shirts with names on them, but it never says Donnie. It's always somebody else's name.
Yeah,
I love that.
and
And
he's
then,
not exactly presenting as who he is because it's not clear who he really is.
yeah, I think
at
Donnie
all.
may be the other character who hasn't really thought about his image because he's a child. So children at that stage just don't do that yet. He just isn't anybody. He doesn't have an identity to project. But then there's Walter, of course, who, among other things, insists that he is Jewish and insists on the authenticity of his Jewishness, when in fact, to borrow a line from a later
Jewish as
film, he
Tevye.
married into it. He's Jewish as fucking Tevye. That's right.
Fucking Tevye, I love that line.
God, that is such a classic line.
Troy, can I just jump in quickly on that
Please, yeah.
identity thing? Because I'm thinking one of the things that this is like the tumble and tumbleweed that is the dude. Many times we see him parroting lines, and it's not even clear that he is conscious that he's doing it, right? But many times through the film, he utters things that we've seen earlier, like the George Bush stuff about the line, and that's all also raises the question of like exactly who is the dude, an amalgamation of these things, of the '60s, of the Zen dude, because and I mean, many look, a lot of us. Maybe this is like it's a parody of the fact that many of us, we get a little bit of info and then we at the next party we go, did you know this and that? So we all kind of do it, but the dude, he does seem to be porous in that
Yes. He's a bit of a
stuff comes
sponge.
in and it kind of like just
Yeah.
comes
Yeah.
out at whatever time.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
that's part of his
Yeah,
identity.
a phrase like the parlance of our times is going to stick with him, and then he's just going to use it, and I love that. He does do that. But of course, there's
He's
one moment
mimetic.
where, yeah, but there's one moment where he does it, and I feel like it's intentional, and it's really a great moment. And that's where, again, he's figured out the mystery, and he and Walter storm into Wealthy Lebowski's office, and he says, "Where's the money, Lebowski?" So there's that question
Yeah.
again. But the dude has taken ownership of that question, right? It was directed at him almost as a weapon at the beginning.
Yeah.
And now he's grabbed it and he's using it. And he's
Yeah.
using it against the
Nice.
right person, right? He's got the right target now. So I think
excellent.
that's a beautiful moment. I love that.
That's awesome. Please continue with your philosophical
Um,
observations.
on this identity thing, I just want to mention again this question of names. I mentioned Donnie and the dude himself, but also, of course, Bunny Lebowski. Her real name is, or original name at least, is Fawn Knudsen, and then she's got the porn name as well, Bunny La Joya or La Joya, depending on pronunciation. And then Uli Kunkel also goes by Carl Hungus, right? There's such a multiplicity of identities, and in a lot of these cases, like both Bunny and Uli, but probably Wealthy Lebowski too, it's people really trying to change who they are and really trying to, adopt a whole new identity in some way.
Don't you think that connects back in a way to the subversion of the masculinities and the heroes of American cinema? Because there's this way of trying to show like all these heroes, whether it's wealthy men, think of like Elon Musk today, or cowboys, or sexual athletes, or detectives, noir detectives. There's a phoniness to that.
Yeah.
The film kind of points that out.
I think that's right. There's a real concern with phoniness in this film. What is real? What is authentic? Is Walter's Jewishness authentic? Is the wealthy Lebowski authentic, and so on? And the dude is, I think, again, you can point to moments where he's not perfect, but he's a pretty authentic guy. You know who he is when you first meet him. That's who he is, and he really abides by that identity, I think.
I think it's interesting too that
Yeah.
Bunny's real name, Fawn, is a sort of like a pre-sexual being, a mammal, and then her
deer,
adopted name is a hypersexual mammal. But they're
Isn't
both
that
mammals.
great?
They're both little fuzzy mammals.
Yes, he didn't change the name that much. That's right. I love that. I think also in terms of
She fucks like a
philosophical,
bunny.
Exactly, clearly, and she loves life.
She's got that license plate with
Yeah.
the pound
Oh
on
God,
it.
that's right.
That's great. Yeah.
There's
She's
some,
got the devil. Remember, she's got the devil lives some loves to spare.
I think a deep philosophical issue in this film is the vision of the universe we get here optimistic or pessimistic? And I think that's a very difficult question in this film because it feels, again, it's a comedy in the sense of being very funny. And comedies are generally set in optimistic universes. But of course, as we know, it's the Coen brothers. They can make a very funny film set in a very bleak universe. Fargo, for example. Is this another film like that? Well, on the surface, it's not Fargo. It's much friendlier, brighter, funnier, more colorful, etc. And yet there's still a kind of pessimism here, I think, that I find, and maybe it's linked to one meaning of the word nihilism, again, which of course keeps coming up with us, which I find in a lot of Coen films, which is that in their films, when people try to improve their life in some way, when they take decisive action, it rarely succeeds. It almost always has some sort of bad consequences. It sets in motion a chain of events, right? It backfires in some way. And so sometimes, and maybe with the lucky ones, I think, with the more comedic ones perhaps, like Raising Arizona, the people just end up back where they started. They haven't really made any progress, but they haven't been damaged either. Inside Llewyn Davis is kind of like that too, a circular motion right in the plot. More often, I think they end up dead, like in Blood Simple, The Man Who Wasn't There, Llewellyn Moss in No Country for Old Men, Carl Showalter in Fargo, Chad Feldheimer in Burn After Reading, many characters in Buster Scruggs, right? There's many examples of this, ending up dead as a result, again, of chain of events you set in motion. Or they end up alone, confused, and injured with an unhealable wound of some sort, like Miller's Crossing, Barton Fink, True Grit, and Sheriff Ed Tom in No Country for Old Men. So the dude, again, this goes back to something we were saying about him. He mostly avoids decisive action. He's drifting. This is his sort of strategy in a way for getting through life. But again, strategy's not right because it is who he is. It's authentic. He's just happy to abide. He's wise enough not to get too attached to things. He would have let the rug go. But again, Walter's the one, the decisive one, who says, let's do something about this. And as is typical, Walter's pursuit here and the dude's pursuit once he takes it on, the pursuit of the rug, it's like Marge's pursuit of the wrongdoers in Fargo, or like Matty Ross's pursuit of the wrongdoers in True Grit. He's seeking justice. There was a cosmic balance. Then there was a violent act involving a family or a home being ripped asunder and invaded by outside forces that destroys that equilibrium. He wants to get his rug back, the rug that tied the room together, in order to restore that cosmic balance. And again, in almost every one of these films, when somebody tries to do that, it ends badly. They don't restore anything. It's impossible to bring back the world that was before. They just end up doing more damage or causing more damage. It becomes a kind of a tragedy, even where the intentions are good. You see that over and over in Coen Brothers films, and I think you certainly see it in this one. And for me, one of the really deep philosophical films, the philosophical themes is that issue. Because I think that on the surface, the last few minutes aside with Donnie's death and so on the surface, it's very funny and bright and colorful, and it looks like an optimistic film, and it feels that way. And I do think there's a way of reading it, which is, absolutely valid. It goes back probably to some of the things we were saying about the cycles and human life abiding and going on, and every death balanced with a birth, etc. But the other flip side of that is every birth is balanced with a death. There's this very sort of pessimistic thing that, don't try to act decisively. It's not going to go well for you.
This is like you with the splat in Hudsucker. You find these dark themes, which increasingly persuade me. But I think it's pretty optimistic at the end. I mean, with the now there is the possible subversion that comes out of the mouth of the stranger. But I mean, there's hope. A birth is always hopeful. People find births hopeful, and the dude persists. And I have a sort of postmodern read on this, is that that connects with this sort of drifting quality, is that the rug is like a transcendent signifier, and it's what holds the room together. But now we're in a society. This is like Nietzsche and nihilism, where the widening gyre, from Keats, is like it's widening. The falcon can't hear the falconer. Blah blah blah. Meaning has been lost. If you tie them like to God, who's dead now, and the rug is lost, like God is dead is like the rug is gone, and but the dude doesn't need it. He doesn't need that kind of anchor. It's his abiding that defeats nihilism and that creates meaning, and it'll persist in the next revolution. And that's my more optimistic reading. But anyway.
I think the optimistic reading is there. More and more as I watch these films, I feel like each one ends in this place where there's two ways of reading it, and there's a more optimistic one and there's a more pessimistic one. I mean, there's some that you just have to be pessimistic, but there's no optimistic reading of No Country for Old Men, so I'll grant you that.
Definitely
not. But in so many of them, I feel like, both readings are there, especially in the comedies, I think. And it's sort of up to you to choose, but they want you to feel both. They don't want you to just see one. They want you to feel the pull of both, because I think they think both of them get something right.
I think on that point, it's not a coincidence that the final scene, we see the bowl. There's someone bowling, and the ball is headed towards the pins, and they fade to black. It goes to black, and we hear the pins. The question is, did he bowl a strike or didn't he? And I think that ties into this theme. Is it a optimistic or a pessimistic film? Is it an optimistic or a pessimistic universe? And I think it's no coincidence that we don't really see the conclusion. It's left to us to figure out or to ponder.
I totally agree. And I've been fascinated by that choice to cut that scene exactly where they do, because you can't quite. And I looked so hard to see, could you tell? Because it sure looks like it's going to be a strike. And it sounds like, well, you feel like it's a strike, but you don't know for sure. You can't see it.
I knew Robert would solve it. That's good, Robert.
But that scene, that's a quite long take at the end. It's several minutes, and it begins, I think, with that same bowler bowling a strike. Yeah. And then, so of course, one theory, a much more pragmatic theory, is that they just couldn't get it, so that he bowled a strike at the end, and that was sort of the best take. And so they said, look, we got to use it, and so we won't show that it's not a strike. But I like your thematic reading of it better. I think you're right.
That's good.
That
guy's name is Barry Asher. He's a professional bowler.
I was going to, you know what, Peter? I was going to say, just watching him bowl, his whole form and deportment, when you watch it, you're like, hey, this guy is a professional bowler. Yeah. So I have a feeling that guy, let me just say, I'd put my money on that guy. That's not the reason they cut it, that he couldn't bowl a strike.
I suspect that you're
right.
That out there. And your suggestion makes sense of it. I love that long take at the end. That's a beautiful ending. So it's well done.
Back to Philia with that. The dude's last words are actually not "dude abides." It's almost you can't barely hear it, but he's walking off towards Walter, and he raises the beers, and he just calls out to his friend. He's like, Walter. He's got the beers. And I think that's also a way that the last word from the dude anyway is about friendship and beer. But,
Friendship and beer, nice
beer. They're forever intertwined. Friendship and beer.
Robert, what have you got for philosophical?
You guys covered a lot. I'll just go through. I was thinking about, of course, the theme which we've talked about before, recurrence. They love recurrence, like in Hudsucker, the bowling balls and the cycles, and even the notion of Zen as being at the heart of this, even though it's not explicit, but the dude is kind of a Zen guy, and the kind of like a striving for nirvana, you're in the cycle until you can make your way out. And also the theme of appearance versus reality, I was thinking about. A couple things quickly here. Well, I think another theme is relativism. And I think you mentioned this, Troy. But, we've talked about Ethan Coen having been a philosophy major at Princeton, your alma mater, Troy. And so I don't think it's not a coincidence that the dude says, that's just like your opinion, man. And, of course, as you mentioned before, when the Big Lebowski is caught red-handed, he says, you've got your story, I've got my story. So I think the Coens are always ready to remind us of kind of the dangers of relativism. I think I don't believe that they're relativists, but I think they always like to inject this possibility or the specter of relativism. And of course, when you think about it, the response, well, that's just like your opinion, man. It's ridiculous. I mean, it's true, but it's ridiculous. His response is. It's the most tepid kind of response he could give to that aggressive act on the part of Jesus.
Yeah.
But so anyway, we see relativism throughout the Coens, but also that, as a philosophical theme. And the last thing I want to say, and then we can, if you want to jump in, is I want to circle back to the nihilism theme. And Troy, both of you touched on this, but I think nihilism plays a central role in the film, but I think avoiding nihilism plays a central role in the film. And so thinking about how do we avoid nihilism? How do we get out of nihilism? And there are many ways to do it, right? We can become a Ubermensch. We can think, I can accept the eternal recurrence. I can accept the meaninglessness and absurdity and do it in this macho kind of a way, Nietzschean way. But I think the dude's answer to how do we avoid or how do we deal with nihilism is that non-achievement is like the honest way of being in the world that is a fuck you to nihilism. But it's not an active fuck you. It's just like non-achieving is the way to deal with nihilism, at least from what you were getting from the dude. He's blown about like the tumbleweed, right? That's his answer to nihilism. And, going back to Sisyphus, Peter, right? It's like he gets meaning from this kind of repetition. He gets meaning from existentialist meaning from this task that is, of course, representative of the absurdity of our existence. So I think that's important to see the dude. And Troy and you and I have written on this that, the world is nihilistic or could be, or the world is morally corrupt. And the dude is kind of like this noble anti-hero, right? He's like, I'm just living my life. I'm just being blown around. And so I think in a way the Coens are saying, if the world is nihilistic, here's a way to live. And of course, as we've talked about before, it's come up in previous conversations that the dude is like the anti-macho, anti-capitalist. Like, we're not taught to live like the dude. That's partially what makes him so funny. We're taught to strive and accomplish and achieve, emphasis on the word achieve. And of course, the dude says non-achievement is actually the way. And so I think that that take on nihilism, I find that kind of brilliant. I'm going to say it's Ethan because of his philosophy background.
Seems likely. There's something very Thoreau about the dude, right? The Thoreau of civil disobedience, just don't get your hands dirty, right? Don't be part of anything bad. And the best way not to be part of anything bad, not to be complicit in something awful, is not to do anything at all and sort of withdraw from the game, which is what the dude has done, into a different game where nobody gets hurt, bowling. So I think there's a real purity in a way in his lifestyle. And whereas contrast that with Walter. And again, Walter's the one who gets the dude not to be like the dude, and all the troubles come from that. But Walter, and yes, we did write about this in our paper, that going back to the rule rigidity thing and so on, Walter just seems to have this terror of nihilism. and is so afraid that the world fundamentally deep down is meaningless that he fills it with rules that he has to stick to. It seems like one of the things that attracts him to Judaism is the fact that there are these rules about things you can't do on the Sabbath and stuff like that. He loves that. It gives his life structure and meaning. And he feels like, it's not nihilistic because he lives by these principles. But he's so tightly wedded. Walter loves security. And what is his business? It's a security business. So check security, right? Like he's craving security. He's selling or trying to sell what he wants himself, but never really has, because no matter how tightly you bind yourself to rules, you still feel that yawning chasm, right? It's there. You can't really cover that up. So he's always still a little bit afraid on some level. If he could learn to just, let go like the dude does, you think he'd be so much happier.
And Troy, on that purity point, notice too, the dude says when he's recounting the highlights of his life, when he says, I was one of the authors of the Port Huron Statement, the original, not that compromised
second draft. That's right.
I love your analysis, Robert. That is so great, especially when you talk about the Ubermensch. Like, it's a way, this is answer to the Ubermensch theory. Like, you don't need, it's not the Ubermensch that'll overcome nihilism. It's going to be the dude. And it's just sort of like
the non-achiever.
Untermensch or something. And in fact, achiever, the people at Lebowski Fest have picked up on your theory here, I think, because like they sell T-shirts when you go to the Lebowski Fests. It just say achiever on it, and they ask you to like go around the world and take pictures of yourself at places wearing your achiever shirt. Well, the documentary about the fest is called that too, Achievers, but it's totally ironic, right? I mean, they're not achievers is the whole point.
They're not achievers by the conventions of standard society, but they are achieving something, right? There's something to be achieved by not achieving in the ordinary sense. So.
Oh, you're so Buddhist. Achieving that's not achieving. Or you Derridian, maybe.
They're not achievers by the Big Lebowski's supposed
there you go. Right.
Standards.
That's right.
Which he, of course, himself falls short.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. Great job, Robert. That's awesome. Oh, can I say one last thing about the philosophical bits there? Just two little details. This is not themes, but so after Maud and the dude, have sex on like one of the.
You mean coitus?
Coitus. That's what the word I was looking for. Thank you. After they coit, they make a verb. They on one of the tables or bookshelves there is being in nothingness. Sartre's being in nothingness there, and Walter, as they're walking out of the bowling alley at one point, just before they encounter the nihilists in the parking lot, he refers to the Rambam, which is like a medieval Jewish philosopher, Maimonides. It's his nickname. And although he gets the years wrong of the guy, he puts him in the wrong century. I forget what he says, 14th century or something. But anyway, those are two places where there's little tiny illusions that I can't think that they weren't put there intentionally.
I was thinking too, just circling back for just a moment to the dude's, interfacing, if you will, with nihilism and his response to it, and even literally when she says, will he mind if I blow? And she said he's a nihilist, and he goes, that must be exhausting.
Exactly,
So
I love that line.
Another
so
piece of evidence that's
Great
the way
line.
he deals with nihilism.
Great line.
To be a nihilist is to.
That's Nietzsche.
Not only is to be a nihilist exhausting, to be an Ubermensch is exhausting, but to be the dude is the anti-achiever.
Yeah.
That's right. Of course, what's funny about
phonies.
that line in connection with Uli is that he's not really a nihilist. He's not really committed to it. He doesn't even really know what it is. And they're sort of revealed. It's not fair, right? At the end, he's a fucking nihilist here, right? And this goes back again to the thing about image, right? Here's one more guy trying to project an image. I love the fact that the same actor in the previous film, Peter Stormare, plays somebody who's clearly a kind of a very dangerous nihilist, but never calls himself. He doesn't care what people call him. He doesn't think about labels. Whereas, so he's the authentic nihilist, and here we see the inauthentic nihilist who labels himself that, but isn't actually the thing, which maybe is more nihilistic ultimately. Who knows? Yeah,
I think this is a good place to segue into Coen Brothers themes, and there's a lot of them here. But Troy, do you want to?
Oh, sure. Okay. Well, yeah, I'll say a little something. And I mean, because we get to talk about the dudes Johnson. We haven't said very little about that yet, and yet it's central. We talked some about the family already, so I won't say much more about that. But again, Coen brothers like to make movies about the family. I was surprised when I started rewatching their films how many children there are in a lot of these films. I hadn't really thought of them as being very interested in that, but there are. And so here again, we have Donnie as the child, and then we have the literal child who's coming along at the end of the film. But I do think, as we've said, and I won't go on, we've talked about this already somewhat, but I do think it's a film about family. And when you ask the question, how should we live, or what is a good human life, I think if you're an American or if you're an Aristotelian or whatever, it's natural to take part of that question to be, what's a good family? How can we live as, what is good family life and family structure? How can we flourish as parts of families?
Then there's a big family because, remember the big Lebowski, racially, he's pretty cool. So he has a lot of kids who are
different.
He has a
mothers,
rainbow, the Benetton of children there.
That's right. And then, of course, at the end of the film, the two family lines, the two Lebowski lines are coming together because, Maud, who's the wealthy Lebowski's daughter, is having a kid with the dude. So, imagine if they did go on to hang out, the family vacations and stuff, they'd be so awkward.
Troy, that is a great, I've never thought of that, is that the two Lebowskis come together with the child. The child is a true big and little Lebowski.
He really is, yeah. Yeah, that guy's grandfather is the gold brick and ass guy.
Wow.
It's going to be, or I shouldn't say guy because I don't think we know if it's a boy or a girl, but the little Lebowski. So, but well, and I suppose this is related to the question of the dude's genitalia and so on, and this comes back to the masculinity theme again. There's something about there's a lot of, first of all, anxiety in the film as it goes on, directed towards the threat of castration and such things. This comes up repeatedly, both literally and figuratively. That is, people, there's not a lot of violence in this film, but there are people who get parts of their body either cut off, as in, the female nihilist's toe, or bitten off, the ear of, the other nihilist at the end, right? When Walter bites the guy's ear off. But then there's also, of course, threats of castration, many of those quite literal, coming from, again, the nihilists. There's this scene where they come in. God, this is such a funny scene. They break into the dude's bathroom, and he's in the bath relaxing. He's just learned, I think, that the police found his car, so he's in a good mood, and they come in and they throw the ferret into the tub, and the ferret, of course, is going after his Johnson. And
the marmot.
Yeah, right. He calls it a marmot. He
Yeah,
just
right.
recognizes what he's being attacked by. I love that. Nice marmot. So
That's awesome.
all this stuff about the dude's Johnson, and he talks about it later, and that's when Donnie says that thing, right? He says, "They're going to cut off my Johnson, man." He says, "What do you need that for, dude?" And there's all these exchanges. Then, of course, he has the dream. And if we're talking about Coen stuff, we ought to at least mention the dream sequences. And we got to say something about the narrator. There's all,
Right.
But right now, so there's the dream with the nihilists and their huge cartoonish scissors, which are ridiculous. What does the dude's Johnson have going on here? Well, I think it's pretty central. And the thing that really got me thinking about how central it is, it was actually a combination of two things. One was the scene in Jackie Treehorn's place when Jackie is on the phone and it looks like he's writing something down in the notebook, and then he leaves for a minute. And the dude, like a good PI, or like, one of the only moments in the film where he's really being a good PI, he hustles
so
over
great.
there. He does the little pencil shading trick to see, the impression of what Jackie wrote. And of course, it's this drawing, this doodle of a guy with this massive heart on, this just huge penis. But what's great about this, I love it, is that the dude takes it anyway, right? He treats it like it's a clue. And maybe he's just covering up his tracks, but I get the feeling that no, he feels like this is a clue. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought it is a clue, right? It tells you what's really going on in this film.
That's great.
And then the other thing was when a friend of ours mentioned something about Jeff Bridges' performance, which is his physical performance, which is so amazing. He walks around, and especially when he sits, he just thrusts his pelvis forward. He sinks into whatever chair he's in, and he's just out there. He's so exposed. One of the great ironies is he's worried about castration and having his Johnson cut off, but he's just putting it out there. He's not trying to shelter it at all, right? The way he moves and holds himself.
Totally man-spreading.
He's really such a man spreader. It's amazing. And so I think, first of all, there's this sort of hidden pun going on here between the phrase private dick, which is what he's acting as, the private eye, right? The DeFino type character, the brother Seamus, and the public dick, which is what he's got, right? He's got a public dick. It's out there. He's not trying to hide it at all. This very much fits in with the dude's overall I'm going to draw two conclusions from this. So first of all, it's a reflection of the dude's personality, both in terms of how comfortable he is everywhere, no matter who he's with, what social status, stratum he's in or whatever. He's just going to make himself at home. The way he sits in that chair in the wealthy Lebowski's office in the first scene with him, like he's just draped all over it. It's nuts, right? He's just comfortable everywhere with everyone, right? He just belongs everywhere. I think there's some truth in the stranger's claim that he's a man who fits right in there, in that sense, that no matter where he goes, he fits right in. But then there's also this other thing going on with him in terms of, again, the lack of privacy. Like the dude's house, people just walk in and out as they please. Right? He can't keep anybody out. When somebody wants something from the dude, they go in and they take it. And even when he tries to bar the door and stuff, he can't do it. It goes so deeply against his nature, right? He's for me, one of the biggest laugh lines in the film, and it's partly just his delivery, is I think it's the tub scene again, when the nihilists come in and of course he's high, he's in the tub, and he says, "Hey, this is a private residence."
The private property does not sit well with the dude.
No, like they've just made a mistake, right? It's so innocent of him. Like, they got the wrong address, right? They've already started beating stuff up. That's what he thinks. But it's not private. That's right. It's never been a private residence. Like nothing the dude has. In the sex scene with Maud, right, where she says, "Love me," and he says, "Hey, that's my robe.
That's my robe."
That's my robe. He can't even lock the door right. He can't lock the barricade.
He can't keep people out. There's no exclusion in the dude. There's no element of, whereas so many of the other people we see are so focused on excluding certain people or being in, being with their kind or whatever. That's why the dude goes everywhere in this movie, right? And he talks to everyone. Defino says it, right? "I love your method.
Yeah.
You're in bed with everybody." Right? He goes everywhere. Yeah. So anybody comes in whenever they want to his place, and he goes anywhere he wants. And I think this is really important, understanding him, and the way he sits and stuff, And then the other connection, I'll stop with this, but the thing about his Johnson and so on is that I think this goes back to that scene of when they confront the wealthy Lebowski, and Walter again goes too far, picks him up out of his wheelchair, throws him on the floor. It's terrible. It's hard to watch in a way. Darkly humorous, as many of their hard-to-watch scenes are, But, of course, this guy, he's in a wheelchair. He's probably impotent. He probably his Johnson doesn't work and hasn't worked for a long time. And I think if you want to understand this guy's psychology, why does he do what he's doing? It's rooted in insecurity. And so when he's looking at the dude acting superior and saying, "You're the bum, I'm the employed person, I'm the valuable member of society, you're shit," the truth is he feels less than the dude. And we get this even in the first the great room scene after Bunny's kidnapping, right, where he comes in, he says, "What makes a man, Mr. Lebowski? Is it a willingness to do the right thing at any cost?" And the dude says, "Yeah, that and a pair of testicles," which I think probably cuts this guy like a knife. Like it's a joke, but this guy,
ouch.
Yeah, like wow, in a way, and I don't think the dude meant it, but I think that it was a very cruel, biting thing to say.
Oh, I never thought of that. So good.
Troy, I was thinking about the going back to the issue of Donnie's question when he says, "What do you need that for, dude?" We actually find out what he needs it for, to carry on the Lebowski name. That's what he needs his Johnson for. He needs, because Maud doesn't seem to have any male siblings. The dude there's no mention of that. So maybe the dude's Johnson is going to continue the Lebowski line. Maybe that's the purpose of.
Yeah, I think that's right. There is an answer to that question, which we find out soon enough. Yeah. It's fascinating how many characters in this film have an interest in the dude's Johnson, and it keeps coming up, one way or another. And then, of course, if we're thinking of insecurity and so on, like the wealthy Lebowski, but I think Walter also, his gun thing is partly, it's a penis substitute.
That's
Walter also. Yeah, don't you think? So Walter's the only one in this film with guns, right? The only time we see guns, which is unusual for a Coen film. It's Walter's guns.
Well, I have a question for you, Troy, about this. So I usually look at all that castration anxieties tied to like the anxiety around masculinity that the film, is engaging and generating in a way too. But we do have this suggestion that Donnie's the Johnson, right, with the shirt. So, one of the things you can only see if you stop frame by frame like I did, when he's bowling in the very first time we meet him, stitched onto the back of his shirt. It's a weird position. It's like at the top left shoulder. It says Johnson, right? And then he is killed or dies later on. The Johnson who's identified in the opening actually is, removed
Cut
from
off.
the scene.
Nice,
Yeah.
nice. Wow, that's
But
great.
I don't know how
You
he's
know,
the Johnson,
Peter, well,
but
Peter, it's like Chekhov said, a Johnson in the first act has to be cut off in the third, and so there you go.
Chekhov's
yeah, that
Johnson.
old chestnut.
Chekhov's
Yeah.
Johnson.
Fosl again coming up with that's like a deep,
Look
deep,
and see. When
deep
I
note.
first saw that, I was like, "Are you kidding me? No freak way!" You can only see it if you stop. If you pause the thing and look at it.
I love it. Let me mention a couple more, and I'll be pretty brief. These are ones I generally talk about. Robert, you already mentioned the border violations and boundary transgressions. There's a whole lot of that in this film, including stuff we were just talking about with the dude again. People just going into his house at will. But of course, then there's this contrast between the dude and Walter, where the dude just doesn't seem to care about these lines very much and stuff. And Walter's the guy again saying we got to draw a line in the sand. This aggression will not stand. Walter's the guy freaking out when another bowler's toe allegedly goes over the line. I think that's a wonderful symbol, of Walter's overall attitude to life. Somebody went over the line, and he's just got to respond by pulling out his gun. So it's this crazy overreaction. But a lot of the stuff I think relates to again the dude's just his willingness and his ability to go anywhere he wants. So it's like these doors don't seem to keep him out very much. And like Fargo, when we talked about Fargo, at the center of it there was this border violation, the home invasion, which we find a version of in so many films. We've got various home invasions here too. Again, mainly inflicted on the dude. But of course, at the end, again, the dude turns the tables. When he figures out the mystery, he and Walter invade the wealthy Lebowski's home. They go in there without permission in order to confront him. So that gets flipped too. And then in terms, we can also connect this to stuff we've already talked about of families coming apart, right? And stuff like that, the family not holding together. All this, I think, is linked in these interesting ways. The dream sequences we should certainly talk about. Common, Coen Brothers thing. We see that a lot. I've got my Coen gun rule, right, which you'll recall, which again, my theory that in every Coen Brothers film, if a character fires a gun, that act of firing tells you something about their real character, about who they are. Now, in this film, of course, Walter's the only one with guns, and we see him with guns twice. He pulls the pistol, first of all, in the bowling alley in order to threaten Smokey. Doesn't actually shoot anybody, but he sure seems like he's ready to. I mean, he's on the verge, and the dude manages to talk him down. I certainly think that reveals a lot about Walter's character in that moment, even though he doesn't actually fire the gun. The other scene,
There's the Uzi.
That's the other scene with the Uzi, and he also doesn't actually fire the Uzi, but the Uzi fires itself, right? Walter,
It's like a premature ejaculation.
exactly. Going back to the theme again about Walter's penis, etc. Exactly. He loses control of it. He brings it with him inappropriately, loses control of it, and of course it shoots up the dude's car. So what we certainly, if we take this as emblematic of Walter's character. He loves his guns and they make him feel safe, but they shouldn't because he has no control over them and he wields them very inappropriately and hazardously and also symbolically, basically. They represent something to him. Maybe the last thing, I think the last thing I'll mention here is the narrator. Again, Coens love their narrators. Almost every film we've watched so far starts out in one way or another, either with a sort of explicit off-screen narrator or with somebody on screen like Miller's Crossing and Barton Fink, saying things that sort of perform the role of a narrator, telling us what the movie's about. Well, this is a really interesting case, isn't it? And I want to hear what you guys think about this one, right? Because this narrator, he seems to be telling us or trying to tell us what the film is about, and in particular trying to describe the dude, but he does such a poor job of it. He says almost nothing. He loses his train of thought, forgets what he's saying. He says these very vague things that are hard to understand. The dude, he just fits right in there. He's the man for his time and place. Well, what is he talking about? Because it's not at all obvious what that means. It's puzzling. He doesn't seem to know. He tells these weird stories and little jokes and stuff, He doesn't seem to make sense. So one gets and then of course he appears again a couple times in the film. So at first he's just an off-screen narrator, but he comes back later on screen twice, and actually meets the dude and talks with him. So he becomes a character in the film as well. So, I mean, to me, and I want to hear your thoughts on it, both of you, but to me it seems like there's something in here again connected. Maybe this goes back to relativism, Robert, you were talking about, or something closely related to that, the question of truth and how the Coens are very aware of what their characters know and what they don't know. All the way back to Blood Simple, again, where we, the audience, know more than the characters do, and we're in a position to understand what's going on, etc. That doesn't so much happen here in Big Lebowski because, we're as confused as anybody through most of it trying to figure it out. And the dude presumably gets to the solution before we, the audience, do. But we definitely are aware of limitations on people's knowledge and misunderstandings, even the basic misunderstanding of mistaking one Lebowski for another that sets the whole plot in motion. And there's this talk about expertise, right? In the little porn video, when Carl Hungus shows up to fix the cobble, he says, "I am expert," right? That's why I'm here. He's the expert who's going to fix the cable, right? So there's these little mentions of ideas about expertise. I think Walter's use of the word amateur again is something related to that as well.
Nice.
That you should be an expert on something, not an amateur, if you're going to dabble in it, and so on. And you would expect your narrator to be a kind of expert who knows what's going on, and instead we get this amateur narrator whose knowledge is very limited, who we feel like isn't really helping us at all and can't really be trusted. And so I think that there is this theme of limited knowledge, lack of trust. There's a lack of omniscience, right? There's nobody in this universe who really knows what's going on. There's a certain point at which the dude figures out a big part of what's going on in terms of the detective plot. And then, of course, what happens is we get the wonderful thing, the subversion, a very noir gesture in a way. In the classic Sherlock Holmes story or whatever, when the detective figures out the truth, that's it, right? Everything is good now. We've resolved it. Justice is restored. The wrongdoers will go to jail and be punished, whatever. But in a noir film, and in this film, that may not happen. The person might figure out the truth, but it doesn't matter, because that's not the way the universe works. The guilty party has money, or in this case, no, but they have power. They have respectability. Nothing's going to happen to them. So again, when they confront the wealthy Lebowski with the truth, in the moment where you're, as the audience, sort of expecting, oh, good, it's resolved now, they won, the guy just shrugs, yeah, so what? You've got your story, I've got mine. Nothing's going to come of this. Maybe that is what happened. It doesn't matter what happened. So I don't think it's a skepticism about the truth exactly. There is a truth to what happened, but it's a skepticism about the power of merely knowing what happened to make a difference in the world. And so I think there's a real kind of deep epistemic anxiety that's coming out at various levels in this film. And it's signaled by the very beginning with this narrator who, even though he's the narrator of the film, doesn't really know what he's talking about.
Nice.
It's great. Well, since you solicited about the stranger's monologue, I always found it to be a little bit of a puzzle when he says, sometimes there's a man for his time and place, and he fits right in, and then he says, and that's the dude in Los Angeles. So, at first, or, still puzzling, is like, wait, the dude, people go to Los Angeles to pursue their dreams, and they auditions, and everyone's got a screenplay in the drawer. The dude is not like that at all, right? He's the opposite of that. But on the other hand, and we find this in a lot of Woody Allen films, reflected that, on the East Coast, there's a reputation that LA is like the cool, laid back kind of place, right? So even though it is the second largest city in the country, and it's a megalopolis and everyone's striving, there is this weird reputation of LA as being chill and people just sort of surf and lie on the beach. So maybe the answer to the puzzle is that the stranger is reflecting a kind of caricature of LA, where the dude is kind of, he reflects that a whole LA vibe. I'm not sure that, I'm convinced. I always found that puzzling, because I never thought the dude is the man who fits in his place, Los Angeles. Maybe the dude like Santa Cruz, or I don't know, something like that.
Santa Cruz, I like that.
He's more of a Santa Cruz kind of cat.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of it. To me, it does feel at least partly ironic in the sense that the dude sort of fits in everywhere. So the idea of the dude fitting right into one particular place, I don't know if it makes sense, because he just sort of gets comfortable wherever he goes. But he he would be sort of an oddity wherever he goes, because he stands out in a certain way too.
And the stranger tells us right after that he's lazy, and he makes a kind of a reference to Los Angeles being a city rife with lazy people, because he says something like, he's possibly the laziest in Los Angeles, which would place him in the running for the laziest worldwide. And as someone who is in Los Angeles and lived in Los Angeles, it's weird, because I don't get the impression of people, and even friends of mine who are like hardcore surfers. Just lazy isn't something it's a weird moniker to give to Los Angeles, I think. So it's still kind of confusing to me.
I just don't feel like you can trust this guy at all. Whatever he says, you got to take it
he's
with a
not
big grain of
reliable
salt.
narrator.
Yep.
Yeah. Although, I was thinking, there are places the dude wouldn't have fit in. I think, like, I don't know, some authoritarian North Korea. I can't see the dude in North Korea. That'd be an interesting thing. But why exactly Los Angeles? Then I was thinking also that time period, 91 was the way at which, at that moment, at the end of the Reagan era, when all those Vietnam tropes are kind of getting exhausted, maybe that's where he fits in. And it's just that it's the West Coast, so like when the tumbleweed gets down to the beach, like that's as far west as you're going to go, in the U.S. So maybe it's something about the West at that moment, and it's suffering from nihilism. I don't know. It's a big stretch there, but that's kind of the way I might think about it.
Oh, Peter, did you want to take this? You want to pick that up, Peter, the Coen brothers themes?
Sure. I mean, I just wanted to talk. I mean, it's true, I usually talk about skepticism, but I like what you said about epistemic anxiety. That was all pretty right. If there's like maybe some skepticism be about the future, certainly. I mean, we talked about maybe the hope with the baby, but there's just like, where is this country going? Where is it? What's going to happen in the future? But for me, nihilism is a theme that goes through a lot of their films, whether it's the tornado in Serious Man or the Dark Rider of the Apocalypse in Raising Arizona, or Anton Chigurh in No Country for Old Men. The nihilism here isn't just the nihilists, I think, though. It is that phoniness to everything. And that's also something that's associated with Los Angeles, by the way, even if it's not true. People, I think of it as all surface and there's no depth, and all appearance and no reality. Just a play of signifiers without any anchors. So I think the film engages it in ways we already mentioned, and that is it responds to nihilism with abiding, and then unpack abiding in the way we have. I think that's to me the most important element of it, and it is that way in which it's not just these characters, the nihilist, which you also mentioned Fargo, of course. It's on the scene. It's in the West, but written large, it's like the loss of masculinity is the loss of the big phallus. It's the loss of the big signifier. It's no longer a phallocratic society, not just in a feminist way, but it's like it doesn't have any resolute sort of pillars of meaning or whatever. The church is gone, and Hollywood presents all these phony things that aren't real, and
we're right back at Barton Fink with that.
Yeah, exactly. Barton Fink is another one, right? And the gun in Blood Simple, and also in Blood Simple, just the fact that not only does nobody know what's going on, what you feel like is like, even if they did, it would still be a really bleak kind of place, bleak and cruel and hopeless in a way. So I think that's the thing. But you're right. Barton Fink brings us back, and that's an interesting connection, isn't it? Because we're back into Hollywood again. And but here in a different way, several of their films, of course, deal with Hollywood. So I think that responds to when I think about how does it fit in to their oeuvre, I think it's the way, it's another way of addressing nihilism. I mean, one thing I sometimes think is that we haven't gotten into No Country, but like in Lebowski, maybe in Arizona we don't know about nihilism winning, but it's sort of optimistic. But here, nihilism is defeated, but in No Country, nihilism wins. Something like that. In Blood Simple, nihilism wins. So that to me is like a theme that I see pervading not just this film, but all their films, or most of their films. Fargo too. I mean, the nihilist's defeated, but we don't know where that future is going. That baby's coming into a very bleak world. So.
As far as Coen brothers themes, there's so many, and you guys touched on them. I think it is the buddy movie, but I think going to the and it's also a Western, which they love Westerns. But I wanted to go to their sort of subversion of the film noir, which this isn't their first one. In fact, they've done a lot of those with their first film too. But it seems like the Coens, they set themselves an interesting task to make a film noir that's hilarious and also kind of mirrors some of these confusing, confounding plot points from The Big Sleep. So it is a subversion of the film noir, but it's an interesting subversion in that they bring in the comic elements, which, of course, when you think of film noir, it's kind of antithetical. You don't think of a comedy. So I think it's a unique Coen subversion of their history of their practice of subverting film noir. And also another theme is that we saw in Hudsucker is this, as I mentioned earlier, this kind of critique of capitalism or capitalists, if you will. I don't know if it's a critique of capitalism full stop, but it is a critique of capitalists. And of course, as you both mentioned, the appearance versus reality. They love. I'm trying to think, is there a Coen film that doesn't in some way echo that theme? As well as you mentioned, Troy, the transgressing boundaries. They love that theme. So yeah, that stuff. And you've also mentioned the theme of masculinity, which appears in a lot of Coen brothers films. But the only last thing I had jotted down was, I think, of all the Coen films and perhaps of all the films in movie history, I think one could reasonably argue that this is the most quotable film in movie history, right? And I think how many people learned what the word micturated means just from the Coen brothers? So yeah, I do think that's a lot of the Coen films are quotable, but this one, I'm going to put my money on. This is the most quotable film in movie history. So there's my.
I think you're right. I think if you did the scientific study, like the ratio, running time to quotable lines or just number of words to quotable, it's ridiculous how quotable this film is. I swear,
Totally.
more than half, probably at least 2/3, maybe 75% of the lines can be quoted. And it's such great dialogue. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, that's how the Lebowski Fests got started. In fact, there was two Louisville guys, Will and Scott. They were at a Comic-Con type thing, and they're sitting around, and all of a sudden they start just quoting from the film, and others joined in. And they just sat around for a couple hours quoting from the film. And they're like, we got to do something with this. This is something we got to, and hence Lebowski Fest were born.
Well, what do you say we start to head towards the musical themes?
Yeah, sounds good.
Sounds good.
Film.
We've got to hear Robert's theory about
okay, I do
the
have a
dude and
theory
the
about
eagle. Should we start with
Eagles.
that, or should we?
Well, okay, I'll start. Well, let me start with. I read a great essay, and a lot of this I'm going to credit this guy Jeffrey Adams, who wrote on the Coens. But he I think it's a chapter in his book called "Musical Signatures of the Big Lebowski," and so he has this theory that I thought was really spot on, which is, and just to mention, it's this the Big Lebowski, which presages the "O Brother Where Art Thou," which is it's like an eclectic soundtrack, compilation of these songs, some popular, some.
Yeah, it's the first time the Coens have really done a soundtrack like that. Yeah.
Yeah. They it's an amalgamation of all these, mostly from the 60s and 70s. And we should note that the producer of the music producer was T-Bone Burnett, who is still, he just released an album with Ringo Starr just a few weeks ago. So he's still out there working. And I think T-Bone Burnett, he did the music. What was that Jeff Bridges movie where he plays like a kind of a country singer or like a singer-songwriter?
Was that Crazy Heart?
Crazy
Name
Heart.
of it? Yeah.
And that had a big soundtrack, and that was T-Bone. So T-Bone Burnett he's kind of like the man when it comes to these amalgamations or compilations. But this guy Jeffrey Adams, he had an interesting theory that said that the soundtrack it kind of picks out what he calls the musical signature of certain characters, and so let me just go through some. I'm not going to go through everything he talks about, but he has some interesting connections. Like, for example, the tumbleweed that we get in the beginning. That's that's the dude's theme, right? The commentary on the dude's kind of lifestyle and that, and then the Creedence Clearwater. He mentions, it has the word revival in it, which is like the dude. He's living back in the '60s with regard to his lifestyle, but also his music he listens to. It's funny because he was on the road with Metallica, but we never hear him. We never hear any heavy metal. It's the CCR that we hear. This kind of revival to authenticity, right? Credence and purity and clear water, right? So, so that's sort of the dude that's supposed to reflect the dude, and of course, and I brought this up when we were talking about Barton Fink, but the musical signature, if you will, of Jesus, the Hotel California. And my theory was, because many of us wondered, what does the Hotel California have to do with the John Turturro character? And my theory was, well, because the last time we saw Turturro in a film, he was stuck in Hotel California in Barton Fink. So I just wanted to resurrect that theory. This was the time and the place to resurrect that.
That is a good one. I like that a lot.
And there's other obvious ones like Viva Las Vegas for Bunny, and he also thinks that the Send Me Dead Flowers is that's unbeknownst to Donnie. That's his theme, right? It's a farewell to Donnie. So that's the sort of I thought that was an interesting essay. But my theory on, and I don't know how persuasive this is, but I think that the dude's obvious utter antipathy towards the Eagles, maybe, and this goes to our essay, Troy, about the authenticity of the dude, is their sort of commercial co-opting of that genre that Creedence Clearwater Revival is, you're getting the real thing. You're getting the anger and the angst and the beauty of that time. And then the Eagles come along and they sort of co-opt it and they turn it into this, I got a peaceful. I mean, it's like that ain't Creedence, right? I mean, love them or hate them, the critique is, at least my critique is, that the Eagles kind of represent the capitalist sellout to commercial interests of that music, and they're sort of the pinnacle of that. And I think, given that the dude is authentic, then it's antithetical to who the dude is. And so the question is like, why does he get so pissed off at the Eagles? It's a weird, when we witness it, we go, why does he hate the Eagles so much? I mean, the Eagles are the kind of band where you go, either you like them or you're indifferent. But it's rare to have, active antipathy and anger towards the Eagles. But I think that's what's going on. I think the dude sees them as sellouts, and that is, like I said, that's antithetical to the dude's genuineness, his authenticity. So I don't know. I'm putting it out there, ladies and gentlemen.
He just wants their gold bricking asses out of the music business, right? Their human paraquat. Yeah, okay, I can go along with it. I think you're right. I mean, that there is something about them that does seem inauthentic, and it's very calculated, isn't it? You picture a bunch of people sitting around the table working it out. What exactly do we have to do to sell 1 million records by sounding sort of like this, but without the intensity of that?
I mean, no one would accuse the Eagles of having too much angst in their music.
Why do they have a black guy, motivating all that? Is it just for part of the incongruity, and they find that humorous or something? What's that about?
That's because Peter, you brought up the race issue, and it does seem that other than the Asian American proper nomenclature, there's also I think that's the only black character.
There's one black cop. He gets like one line when the two
right.
cops come to the dude's place. But
the Creedence.
He mentions the Creedence. That's right. Or the Creedence.
And it's interesting that those cops are, speaking of, they're pretty chill. Those are the most chill cops you've ever seen.
Yeah, those cops are great.
That's a great question, Peter. I don't know.
I did think that the blonde one reminded me a little of like Scandinavian Fargo type cop.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit,
He had that look. I wanted to mention about the Creedence song that you mentioned, "Looking Out My Back Door." The lyrics to that are really interesting, right? I had to look at them, and it's this story of this guy who comes home and he's tired. He just got back from Illinois, right? So he comes home. He's happy to be home. Many people theorize it's about drugs because basically he just sits and he looks out his back door, but he sees all this crazy stuff. It's like a carnival back there, a parade or something. And so it seems like, many people take it. It's the story of somebody sitting there getting high. And the dude, of course, listens to it in his car while he's smoking and getting high. And it's very applicable to the dude's lifestyle. So you can understand, why he identifies with Creedence so much if we take that particular song and look at the lyrics of it.
And there's only one other Creedence tune in the film, which is "Run Through the Jungle," which is
Right.
definitely primal, and it's touching on something kind of atavistic. So
Yeah, and their use of that in that sequence is just so brilliant.
it's amazing. But can you imagine the
orchestration
Eagles
of that.
doing "Run Through the Jungle"? I don't
No,
think.
they couldn't do it, and they shouldn't be allowed to try. No, absolutely.
Tequila Sunrise, no. The dude drinks White Russians. He's not drinking Tequila Sunrises. No way. That's not his drink.
I like the thought of the Dead Flowers cover as Donnie's song, and
That is so great.
it accompanies that final shot, that final scene, which I think is all one shot, and they play the song in its entirety. It spills over into the beginning of the credits, but they play the whole thing, and it's just perfect, lyrically, but also just the feeling of it.
And and the fact that they used the Townes Van Zandt version
Exactly.
rather
Yeah.
than the Rolling Stones version,
Yeah.
that was perfect.
It is perfect. And I love the Stones version, but I think the Townes Van Zandt version's better, but it's definitely better for this scene. It's more fitting. It's just, it's a lament. It's so poignant, honestly. I find, like I said before, when, again, common experience, first time I saw the film, kind of cold, not sure about it. Now when I watch it, it's so funny. And in the end, it's so poignant.
Yeah, that's a beautiful, beautiful touch in the film. One musical thing I'd observe is that it's just along similar lines. So when Bunny's driving her little red convertible down the road, she's singing "Viva Las Vegas," but it's not Elvis. It's Big Johnson. Big Johnson's version.
What?
No, really?
Yeah. It's Big Johnson. The artist's name is Big Johnson, not.
That's too perfect.
Yeah, it's a 1989 Jaguar XJS, by the way. But yeah, I thought that was a nice little Coen touch there too.
Big Johnson. Wow, that's just too good.
Yeah. Then at the end, you've got a Sean Colvin singing
Yes.
it too. When the credits are rolling, so
Yeah.
you've got the female voice coming in again, but not. Yeah. So the king does not appear. I mean, the Elvis the King.
No, that's right. That's right.
We got the Big Johnson, and then we got the female voice closing it all out.
Wow. Another perfect music choice, I think, is the music that they associate with Jackie Treehorn, the Henry Mancini. Is it called Lujan? I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but that is just so good. And the scene in which he appears too, if you recall that shot and the way the camera moves, and suddenly he's striding across the beach and he's all lit up with that crazy smile, and that music is playing. But that is just a perfect choice. I just love that. But Robert, yeah, I'm very persuaded by this idea that different characters are associated with these different songs, and I mean they really thought a lot about it. Clearly.
Let's not forget the music at the What Have You. I think that's Mussorgsky. I can't
Yes.
remember, but
Yeah, that's right.
it's so perfectly inappropriate that it's perfect. It's perfect in an inappropriate way.
Yeah, it's pictures of at an exhibition.
Exhibition, yes.
The second part of it, sometimes called the Gnomus, which is a gnome, and he kind of looks like a gnome. I mean, the way he was dressed, Marty.
It heightens the ridiculousness of the entire
So great.
What Have You. So it's just
Well, and we haven't mentioned Bob Dylan, but of course there's The Man in Me, which is used twice during the opening credits and then the first dream sequence. And certainly some of the lyrics.
You don't use
in
that
there, too.
twice without purpose.
Oh, yeah.
You don't use that
yeah.
twice without purpose.
Well, Peter, I was thinking about your ideas about how important the female characters are, even though they don't get a lot of screen time. And so I was thinking about those lyrics. What are the lyrics again? It takes a woman in you to bring out the man, a woman like you to bring out the man in me.
Yeah.
I mean, that fits the plot. The whole plot centers on Bunny, and so something is brought out of the dude by his engagements with all this crazy frou-for-all.
You're coming around to my views.
No,
She's the center pole of the whole thing.
I actually do find myself quite drawn to the view that their female characters are really important and that they don't look like it because they're almost never on screen very much. But I argued that with Fargo, and I really think it's true in Fargo. And I think it's true here too. I can see it. These characters are, again, it goes back to that perspective thing. From their point of view, this movie is about something very different. We only get a little bit of that. Just like, for the dude and Walter and Donnie's, from their point of view, what's really important going on right now in their lives is bowling, right? This other stuff is sort of a distraction from it. If you ask them to tell the story, it would be focused on the finals and who beat who and, who bowled a strike here and who choked. And like, that's what is occupying
What if the call
their
comes
mind.
in during a match?
Right, yeah, don't worry. I told them I wouldn't pick up, right? Yeah, that's the center of their lives.
Let me just, if I may interject on that, something popped into my tiny brain, and that is, well, there is a man, at the end of the film, we discover that the man in Maud is the future Lebowski. So there's a
That's
little
right.
man growing in her,
my
literally.
Man in me,
Gosh.
yep.
The man in me.
Every episode, you guys nail something. That's so great.
Yeah,
Damn,
that's right. Isn't that good?
that's awesome.
While we're talking about music too, let me just mention the very interesting how many well-known musicians show up with little tiny parts in this movie. Amy Mann as the female nihilist.
Mann,
Flea, I think, also is
Flea.
one of the nihilists. And then, of course, Smokey is played by Jimmy Dale Gilmore.
Smokey.
And there may be more, but I know there's at least those three. So I don't know how that came about or why that was, but this is a movie full of music and also full of musicians doing things they don't ordinarily do.
I think these are friends of T-Bone Burnett, but I'm not
That
100%
could be.
sure.
Yeah, that would make sense.
But we did see that. We saw Smokey's band at the
did.
Lebowski Fest.
Lebowski Fest.
Was that, Troy, were you at that one? Was that
I
the
think
one?
I was at that one, yeah.
Yeah, they were good.
Yeah.
They were rocking. What do you say we move on to our final category?
I think we're
Our
there.
final, and that is cinematic plot character observations. And I have notes. You know what I wrote down? I put many. So I just thought, we'll just first of all, we'll let Maestro Fosl. He's the observation genius of the Big Lebowski. So take it away, Peter.
So Joel Coen says that every movie ever made is just an attempt to remake The Wizard of Oz, and I take that pretty seriously. I think he's right about that. And
What about movies made before The Wizard of Oz? How does he explain backwards causation?
It's just that good. It was just that good. It can transcend time. Anyway, when you think about Bunny, so she starts off on this black and white, just like a Dorothy farm, in this bleak Midwestern kind of, depression sort of looking place, Moorhead, Minnesota. And she leaves it to go to kind of Emerald City, where there's there are all these gold brickers, and where now she doesn't have a wizard, unless you want to call it the Big Lebowski, or the Wealthy Lebowski, a kind of wizard for her. But she goes there and she's transformed. She goes from Fawn Knutson to Bunny. I call her LaJoya because I think it's the play they're making on it. Bunny LaJoya. But she's the happiest person in the film. And she stays in the Emerald City. When she's coming down the road singing Viva Las Vegas, she's wearing ruby slippers. I mean, they're red sandals. And her toes are painted green, emerald green. And when she gets back to, even though the only time she looks a little bit sad is when the wealthy guy's yelling at her, but it doesn't really stop her for very long. She's out there fucking Carl Hungus, and she's not just engaging it without joy. She seems like she's having the time of her life. She has all these friends in, where is it, Palm Springs she goes off to or something, and then when she comes back, she's literally dancing around the fountain naked. I mean, who else is happier than Bunny Lebowski? That girl has just, she's got the pool, she's got the emerald green bikini on. I mean, she's.
I have a question do you think that Bunny Lebowski is happier than the dude?
This would be like where I say to the class, now discuss, but I mean, she's very happy. And the film centers around her. I mean, everything is about trying to find Bunny. Where's Bunny? Let's free her from her captives, which is all a lie. She's not captive to anybody. She's in control of her life in a deep way. So Unlike, and I think the contrasting person is the Emmy Mann character, the nihilist girlfriend. She literally has no voice of her own. She orders hellbeer pancakes, which is kind of beer pancake. But is it Uli? Yeah, Uli just it overrides her wishes and orders lingonberry for her, and and she of course, whereas Bunny's body is like a site of pleasure and joy. A man's does she have a name in that film? I don't think maybe she doesn't have a name. Her body
Nihilist
gets mutilated.
girlfriend. Yes.
Yeah, the nihilist girlfriend. She's not. She's mutilated. She's lost her body. She's lost her voice. She looks like, some kind of addict. She's all skinny and unhealthy looking. She's the contrasting thing. Now Maud's doing. She's living the life of a rich person, but she's clearly so pretentious, and she's caught up in her, her image and going to the Biennale and hanging out with, artists. And there's a sense in which, you're thinking like this girl is, really just a poser, I think. And she's resentful of Bunny. She criticizes her as being this kind of nymphomaniac who doesn't have any joy, and she's preposterous and all these kinds of things. But I think Bunny's happier than Maud, I think. I don't know. And Maud, she doesn't have a partner. I think that's a really weird thing, by the way, to like trick somebody into getting you pregnant, like without their consent. That's a very entitled, privileged kind of like way of being. She's a very privileged, person. And anyway, I think the women don't contrast well with Bunny. You could all you could say about Bunny, I suppose, is that she's entirely selfish and hedonistic, which is, I think, a valid criticism. But anyway, she's the centering pole of the film, and she seems to be one of the happiest persons. Is she happier than the dude? I don't know. There's a clear answer to that. The dude seems to be really happy at first. He's like just, bouncing along, jaunting down the street, But then, this crisis hits him, and it is a kind of, struggle he has to go through. But at the end, he's restored to his doodly happiness. He's lifting Miller High Life beer. It's a weird thing, by the way. Earlier, the beer they used as a fake beer is called Mike Tree. It appears in films a lot. But at the end, it's Miller High Life, which I thought is signaling he's returned to the high life. So I just think that there was a symbolism in the high life bit there at the end. So he seems to be restored to a kind of happiness at the end after the struggle, that ensues when his rug is taken. Is he happier than Bunny? I think he's deeper than Bunny. That seems likely. She does seem pretty shallow. But, I don't know. What do you think?
What do you think, Troy? Is the dude happier than Bunny?
Oh, I don't know how to compare the two. We don't see enough of Bunny to really know. So I feel like one thing I feel pretty confident about with the dude, because we get evidence of this through the film, is that he's got a certain resilience. He can go through difficult things. Yeah, he's upset at the time for a little while, but he shakes it off. And like you say, he comes out at the end, the same way he was going in, which in this case is good because he was started off happy. Does Bunny have that kind of resilience? I don't know, because we don't see her tested, so we don't see her enough to know. But I agree with you. It's entirely possible, and I agree with you that on the basis of what we see of her, she seems like a happy person who's really got it together in a lot of ways. She's got a sense of humor. She's funny. When he first meets her, she's making jokes and stuff. And Brandt is clearly uncomfortable and embarrassed of her or whatever. But who wants to be Brandt, right? Who's going to trust his judgments? She seems to be doing all right. And she's in a bad position, at least in terms of who she's married to and stuff. But she's clearly making the best of it. And if she wants to get up and go away for a weekend and have some fun, she just does it. So I think there's a lot that's positive to admire about Bunny. Yeah.
I think one question might be, would Aristotle think that Bunny is happier than the dude? And how about Jeremy Bentham? Would he think that
Bentham might? Yeah,
Bentham might. I don't think
Bentham,
Aristotle would jump on that train.
She's got lots of utils, that one.
She's got lots of utils. Yeah, she's optimific.
She's optimistic. That girl is optimistic.
I love the dancing around the fountain bit, man.
That's insane. There may be a depth there that we don't get to see. It's hard to know.
Yeah.
There is a certain just abandon. She's just so joyful.
She may be reading Aristotle in her off hours. We don't see that, but
what do you got? Any more plot character.
No, that'll be well.
observing?
There's so many other films, but I don't. I mean, I was going to say Chinatown is something, because there is this, and it appears in The Big Sleep. There's this old trope out of noir things that things Asian are decadent, salacious and dangerous. There's in the Big Sleep, there's Asian tropes all around the site of pornography and murder, and there's in Chinatown too. I mean, it's a sort of racist, jingoistic trope that gets used a lot in American cinema like this. And it's remember at the end of the film, it's like it's just Chinatown, right? It's
Jake, it's
what did
Chinatown.
he say exactly?
He says something
It's
like,
Chinatown.
Jake, it's Chinatown.
Forget it, Jake. Yeah.
That's the kind of shit that
Yeah.
happens in Chinatown. And of course, like the porn star that appears in Log Jammin' is Asia Carrera. It's like, are you kidding me? So, because Carrera is like from the Porsche, which is a German car, and then she's like fucking Asia. So they're combining two of them there. Saddam Hussein appears, as the bowling guy, handing out the shoes. And then, of course, there's the doctor. There's the guy spraying the shoes in the beginning. There's, Asian. Oh, there's Wu. There's the Korean War. Another war in the film, by the way. And then, so I think
there's the use of the term Chinaman a few times.
Chinaman, right? And so I think they're really going after that element from Chinatown, because Chinatown was so definitive. I mean, it's a later film. It's not 30s and 40s kind of film, but it's it really, I think, locked into the American mind this idea of like the Asian corruption in the war stuff, even in like Blade Runner, right? I mean, Blade Runner is all this like Asian tropes, in there that they're very uncomfortable to watch today. But they were just picking up on a common theme. So those are, and this is, I don't know if this is my idea or I just wrote it down in my notes somewhere. It was like, so dude is kind of like the older Luke Skywalker. When you see him and you meet him, he's on that little island. He's chilling out. He's drinking some kind of milky drink. He's just hanging. That's the future of the dude, I thought. Anyway, I don't know. I'm not going to take credit for that, but there's some of my film observations, and I'm not going to take any more time. Yeah, so let's hear what you got.
Yeah, what do you have, Troy?
I'll make a couple. Yeah, since you mentioned Chinatown, another common point I think between the two films is again this idea of the powerful person who can't be touched, even if it turns out that he did the wrong and you can say so and you've got evidence and stuff. It doesn't matter, right? And we get a very similar sort of bleak view. Chinatown isn't as funny as The Big Lebowski, but but I do think there's some, and it's that noir thing again we've been talking about. I wanted to mention the Coen's interest, and I think this grows sort of around this point. It comes in and it starts to really grow. They're wonderful mimics. They're wonderful at mimicking certain artistic genres, obviously, but also artistic media, even like physical media. And I'm thinking about a couple examples in this film. First of all, the porn video Logjam, that we see a little bit of, which you just mentioned. The look of it is so perfect. They so capture the aesthetics of that cheap video porn of the time, and the way the characters talk, right? The whole thing, it's just they nail it, and you can tell how much pleasure I think they take in doing something like this, the little film within a film type thing. Probably was the same in Fargo when they did the little fake soap opera and stuff, right? Like they just love doing these little bits.
Hudsucker, that little.
Yeah, right, yeah. Like they do this all over the place, and of course when we get to Hail Caesar much later on, it's a whole movie that's almost made of such things, little film sections from different genres, that they just get to recreate. They have so much fun. But you can feel the fun.
Of course, the cable guy's German, and Uli's driving.
He's here to fix the cobble. That's right, and I love that. And then similarly, also involving Peter Stormare, you mentioned the band Autobahn. It's just so quick, but when he's flipping through the albums and he finds their album, that album cover is so perfect, right? Whoever did the job on that, the production design, I love that. Yeah. They take such care with those things. I just, hats off to the Coen brothers and their whole, team for when they do something like that. They want it to look good and they want it to look real, and they also get it to be funny at the same time. I just love those details that really make a film. I wanted to mention Donnie's Remains. This could have actually come under Coen Brothers themes because I think we've mentioned before, again, especially Blood Simple. But they're often concerned with the human body. And for instance, when the body becomes a corpse, what happens then, right? What do you do with it? It seems like and Robert and I have certainly talked about this in so many films, you kill somebody, you don't worry, now there's a body lying there right now, just walk away, whatever, it'll take care of itself. And they're like, no, this is the real world. Like if you killed somebody, you'd have a body to deal with. And that's not easy. And so we see that in Blood Simple. We see it in Fargo, of course, with the wood chipper and so on. And we get a little comedic version of that here with again, the same actor, in this case, Steve Buscemi, playing, the guy who becomes a corpse, and now you have to deal with it. And we get the whole sequence at the end, first of all, at the funeral home, and what's the receptacle going to be? And then the attempt to get rid of the ashes and throw them into the ocean, which of course goes awry. I find this just a recurring theme in the Coen brothers. And it does relate, I think, to just their broader approach of thinking, well, if this were really to happen in the real world, what would it be like? What would you really have to contend with? What are the kinds of things, not movie logic, but, real world logic? And so many of their plots are kind of generated by that. If a person really tried to pull off this kind of plot, here's how it would really work out, right? Here's the thing that would really go wrong. So they think about things like the human body. And it amused me that Steve Buscemi, again, was playing this. Yet again, they have Steve Buscemi's body to deal with in some way. It's a problem. It also amused me, connections with Fargo again, the little scene where he's with the prostitute watching Jose Feliciano. When he makes his lame joke, his pathetic, I was just in and out. I'm a businessman, I'm here for a little of the in and out, ha ha ha. It amused me that in Big Lebowski, of course, Steve Buscemi talks about the In-N-Out burger. I felt like that was a little nod back to the previous line from Fargo. What was the other? I thought I had one. Oh, I guess one last one about the scene at the mortuary at the end. The guy, first of all, we've seen him a couple times now. I forget the actor's name who plays the person at the funeral home.
Warren Keith.
Thank you. He's so good. I love this little performance. Yeah. He's so condescending.
He has some Louisville connection, by the way.
Oh yeah, that's right. You mentioned that when we talked about him before.
I was supposed to meet up with him for lunch, but it fell through.
Oh, I'm sorry. I hope you get to. I want to hear about
it.
Right? He's so good in these little roles. I love the fact. So we're at the funeral home. This stuff is written on the wall, right? I mentioned it before. As for man, his days are as grass. As a flower of the field, so he flourisheth. For the wind passeth over it, and it is gone. And so I noticed first time that the theme of repetition again, of them picking up stuff they hear or whatever, that when Walter is eulogizing Donnie about to scatter the ashes, he uses the word flowering. From this flower of the field, he said, you took him as you took so many bright and flowering young men. And then it struck me this time watching it, the guy Donnelly is his name, right? He's so offended by the Walter's question, could we rent a receptacle rather than buying when you're trying to rip us off, right? And he says, of course, the famous line, this is not a rental house. It really struck me as odd this time when I heard it because this guy, the stuff on the wall, these words from the psalm and stuff, right? It's all about the ephemerality of life, right? It's all about, like, nothing is permanent. Like, this is a rental house, right? This whole world is a rental house. That's the business that he's in. Nothing is permanent. We don't get to keep anything forever. So in a way, it's a completely appropriate question. And I felt like, I love that line. It's always struck me as funny, but I felt like, well, no, there's something deeper under it too. Like this guy's got an anxiety or something because deep down he sort of knows that. And it's like the dude and Walter are pushing him on it. They're confronting him with it. And so he has this reaction. It's not just about him wanting to make money off of them, although obviously that's part of it. But I think there's something deeper going on. And then so I was really watching this scene and this sequence carefully this time and thinking about it. And I just feel like it so makes the film, it really brings home this theme of this idea that it is part of the dude's approach to life. You accept that it doesn't last forever. Nothing is permanent. Nothing is stable. You drift through. You don't hang on too tightly. And if you do that, if you're the tree that bends in the wind, you'll be okay. And I really think that brings home at the end that he can survive pretty much anything because even this will come and go, just as he himself will. So anyway, that I think is what I have as far as that stuff goes.
Nice.
There's
so much. Let's direct listeners to Peter Fosl's, once again, his article for...
It's so great. It's so comprehensive.
Cinematic plot character observations. It's unparalleled. You have to just read it. So I just had a couple things to say. One was thinking about cinematic aspects. The Coen brothers, and this could be a Coen brothers theme, but I was thinking about the use of the beach and Barton Fink. It ends when he's on the beach and he has this, of course, moment of confusion, but also maybe some clarity. We're not really sure. I don't know why it strikes me, but when Walter and the dude are up on the cliff and they're dispersing Donnie's ashes, I feel like that beach, down on the beach, could be Barton Fink sitting there. It's the same kind of feel. It's very bright and sunny and windy, and you're on the West Coast. And it's interesting because when the Coen brothers, their interpretations or their characterizations of L.A., most think about surf films in the 50s and or 60s and, David Hasselhoff and those guys. And the Coen brothers don't go there, but when they do go there, when they do get to the beach, there's something profound. It's not, you don't get Frankie Avalon and Annette Funicello. You get something profound. So I thought cinematographically, that the way that the Coens use the beach is really, the West Coast beach is really interesting.
I think that's a really good observation, and I hadn't thought of it in connection with Barton Fink, but you're right, because of course in Barton Fink, the beach sort of plays the role of reality in a way. When he finally comes to the beach at the end, it's like he's emerged from this set of dreams and this nightmare, and he's so much of the film indoors, and now he's out in reality, and it's like somebody emerging from Plato's cave, right, out into the open. And in a way, there's a little something like that here too. They're mostly indoors. They're in the city, and then at the end of the film, it's like they emerge into reality, and they're facing the reality of their friend's death.
Nice. That's really nice. Yeah.
As far as plot observations, it was brought to my attention in reading, I think it was Erica Rowell's book, where she says that the dispersing of the ashes at the beach, that was taken from a Mel Brooks film. And sure enough, I looked it up. It's called Life Stinks. And there's a scene with kind of the three protagonists of the film, and they're going to, not the beach. Well, they can't make it to the beach because they're poor people. So they go to the sewer, and they say, well, the sewer runs to the beach, and they have a friend of theirs in the shoe box, right? So it's the same kind of thing. And of course, they go to disperse the ashes, and they blow back, just like in The Big Lebowski, they blow back in their faces. However, the interesting thing is they're not really that bothered by it. They're sort of like, oh, poor Frankie, good luck out there. So, yeah, there you go. The other beach scene we see in Lebowski is when they're at Jackie Treehorn's, which is the debauchery and the kind of bacchanalia. And I have been to that beach where they film that. It's up near Zuma Beach. Uh-huh. Just a couple other things. Going back to Warren Keith, he was also the FBI agent in Raising Arizona. But I think Peter brought this up before, because I remember someone I think it was you, said that in Fargo, the voice, the guy who's trying to reach...
the guy from the bank trying to talk to Jerry.
The guy from the bank. It's the guy who's calling Jerry. That's Warren Keith. That's the same actor.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
They like him.
There's a lot of small parts.
But the last thing I want to say is we can't have a discussion of The Big Lebowski without mentioning the performance of David Thewlis as Knox. I mean, that is just that, 3 minute. He's on. I don't know how long he's on. He's on camera just for that one scene. Is that true?
Just the one scene.
Yeah, that laughter. Yeah.
Boy, that's an Oscar-winning performance right there.
He's so amazing.
We haven't talked about the Jesus either.
No, that's true. We barely mentioned. I mean, Turturro. There are so many actors in this film giving, and in some cases very short, but incredible performances, including incredible physical performances. I mean, John Turturro as Jesus, that's unbelievable. Philip Seymour Hoffman also we've mentioned, but his physical performance is outstanding. One of my favorite comic moments, I laughed so hard at this, is it's in the great room scene when they're showing the dude the ransom note and so on. I think it is the note. He hands him the note, and then he turns around and he sort of resets like a robot, and like his arms go.
It's like a robot.
It is so great little move. I see that and I just laugh. And his little nervous laugh when he's uncomfortable about something. I mean, that's an incredible performance.
Well, we can't leave the great David Huddleston out. His performance of the Big Lebowski.
Yeah, he is great. You're right.
Yeah, so yeah, those characters. But Pete, I want to ask Peter this question because we didn't mention this, but I thought you wrote about this, Peter. Are there any coincidences in Coen Brothers films? But Totoro's character is named Jesus. Can you say something about that, Peter? Because I don't think that...
Well, I mean, first of all, it'd be Jesus, right? If it were properly spoken. So why isn't it? Is like a question. He kind of looks a little Hispanic. I don't know. So you're like, why isn't he? But I think there's this like Christian bashing, especially like Catholic bashing, because like the guy at the mortuary, I forget his name, but he's a Catholic by the name suggests it, and then it's that confrontation between the dogmatism of the Jesus, and he's got his Irish sidekick Liam, representing a highly Catholic population too, and at least in the Republic. But yeah, I think it's really the name is pronounced that way to highlight this send up of Catholic dogmatism and Catholic pretentiousness, Catholic arrogance in the case of the rental house guy. So, I don't know. So that's my take on that.
Well, what do you say, fellas? Are we wrapping up? Is it wrap up
I think
time?
we could wrap up. Yeah.
I think we can wrap it up. Wow. Well, let's see. That's episode number 7, which is film number 7, and it seems if everything goes as planned, the next episode will be is that "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou"?
Yes.
Is that our next?
Yeah, it's gonna be fun.
Episode 8. Wow, I think we'll have a lot to say in the music category in that movie. Well, Professor Peter S. Fosl and Professor Troy Jollimore, and for me, Robert Jones. Hey, thanks for listening to this podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you guys at the next No Podcast for Old Men.